The memory confidence gap. You remember it clearly, the exact sound of the door creaking, the color of the sky that day, the way someone looked at you just before everything changed. You're confident, certain. But certainty is not truth. Your memory didn't record reality, it created a story. And the more vivid the story becomes in your mind, the more convinced you are that it happened exactly that way. But here's the terrifying part. Your brain is more loyal to clarity than accuracy. The sharper the image, the more trust you place in it, whether or not it ever happened that way. This is the memory confidence gap. Imagine you're called into court to testify about something you saw a year ago. You feel sure, absolutely sure, that the man in front of you is the one you saw. You remember his jacket, his face, the shape of his walk. But later, security footage reveals he wasn't even there that day. You weren't lying. You weren't guessing. You were just wrong, and confidently so, because your brain didn't recall a video. It built a simulation based on fragments, impressions, emotional weight, and then it rewarded you for believing it. The more confident you felt, the stronger your conviction grew. But the origin of the memory? It was already compromised. When you remember something, you're not opening a vault, you're rewriting the script. Every act of remembering is also an act of editing. The lighting gets brighter. The villain looks crueler. The words said to you sting more, or less, depending on how you feel today. The memory becomes more yours and less real. Neurologically, this is backed by countless studies. One of the most famous was by Elizabeth Loftus. In her research, people watched footage of a car crash. Later, when asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other versus when they bumped into each other, those who heard smashed consistently remembered higher speeds. Some even imagined broken glass that wasn't there. Just one word, one suggestion, one emotional tone shift, and the memory transforms. And yet, those participants felt no doubt. The images in their mind were vivid, emotional, clear, but false. We are not rational record keepers. We are emotional storytellers. And our memories bend to the needs of the story we want to be true. Sometimes, it's to protect us. You misremember an argument with someone you love. You recall being calm and reasonable, but in truth, you were shouting. Your mind softens your role to preserve the relationship, or your ego, and you believe it. The edited memory feels more comfortable, and over time, it replaces the original. Other times, it sharpens pain. You fixate on one moment, being humiliated in school, rejected by a friend, or left behind. Your brain replays it again and again, and each time, the feelings deepen. Details change, faces warp, words become harsher. You no longer remember the event. You remember the feeling of the event. And feelings are easy to exaggerate. Vividness becomes proof. The more detailed it feels, the more confident you become. And confidence becomes a trap. In a 2008 study, researchers showed participants dozens of photographs, some real, some doctored. When asked later, many participants remembered being at places they never visited, doing things they never did, simply because the image looked real. A manipulated photo planted a false memory. But participants weren't doubtful. They were sure. It's unsettling, isn't it, that your deepest, most emotional, most confident memories may be wrong, not slightly off, not misremembered, but completely fabricated by your brain, stitched together with emotional glue and polished with the illusion of certainty. So, what does this mean for your past? It means the version you carry may not be the version that happened, that the person you're angry at may not have said those exact words, that the moment you regret may not have unfolded quite that way, and the memory that haunts you, it might not be real at all, just a feeling wearing the mask of fact. This doesn't make you broken, it makes you human. All of us carry these confident falsehoods, glorified, demonized, idealized snapshots of moments we never truly understood in the first place. And we build our identity on them. But here's the danger. The more confident you are in a memory, the less likely you are to question it. And when memory becomes immune to doubt, it becomes weaponized. People have cut off family, destroyed friendships, started wars, because of memories they were sure were true and weren't. Think of how many arguments begin with, "I remember exactly what you said," and how often that sentence leads nowhere, because we each remember a different version of the same moment, and we each believe ours is the true one. That's the core of the memory confidence gap. Not just that we're wrong, but that we're wrong with complete certainty. That we trust the memory not because it's factual, but because it feels right. And feelings are easier to manipulate than facts. So the next time you're sure, absolutely sure, about a moment from your past, pause. Ask yourself, am I remembering what happened or what I need to have happened? Am I honoring the truth or protecting the version of me I want to be? This isn't about erasing memories. It's about humility, about realizing that even your clearest flashbacks may be edited, filtered, dramatized without your consent. That truth and memory are not synonyms. That clarity is not confirmation. You are not a camera. You are a storyteller, and your stories are beautiful, but they are not perfect, and they were never meant to be. Sleep well, knowing that even if your memories deceive you, they did so to protect you, to build a coherent life, to give you peace. But now, with awareness, you can hold your memories gently and question the confidence they demand, without fear, without shame, because sometimes the most vivid story is just that, a story, and you have the power to rewrite it again or let it fade. The substitution trap. Imagine someone asks you, do you think the government is handling economic policy effectively? That's a complex question, one that demands deep understanding of fiscal measures, inflation control, international trade, and long-term planning. But instead of pausing to explore those layers, your brain, without consulting you, quietly swaps the question with something easier. Do I like the current government? And you answer that, with full confidence, never realizing that the original difficult question was abandoned like an unopened letter. This is the substitution trap, a cognitive sleight of hand so subtle, so pervasive, that you live inside it without ever noticing. When the mind encounters a difficult question, it doesn't like uncertainty. It doesn't wait for you to gather information or reflect. Instead, it instantly, silently, substitutes the hard question with an easier one that feels similar, and offers you a confident response to that one instead. You don't feel confused, you feel smart. And that's what makes it dangerous. The substitution isn't a conscious lie, it's a form of cognitive shortcut, designed by your brain's deep systems to reduce effort, to conserve mental energy, and to maintain the illusion of coherence. It's a trick that feels like truth, and it happens everywhere. Suppose you're watching a charity appeal for disaster victims in a faraway country. The appeal ends with a question. How much should I donate? That question is abstract. It involves your income, your expenses, your beliefs about fairness, your understanding of global suffering. But what actually happens? Your mind swaps it with, how do I feel about this person in the video, the injured child or the tearful mother? That's an easier question. You answer with your emotions, not your reason, and you donate accordingly. And you never even notice the substitution or consider hiring someone. You're supposed to evaluate competence, skill, experience. But you find yourself asking unconsciously, do I like this person? Do they seem confident? And so, charm stands in for qualification. Familiarity substitutes for talent, and entire careers are decided by this trap, repeated over and over again in conference rooms and interviews across the world. This happens not just in decisions, but in opinions, our supposed beliefs. Ask someone, is this policy economically viable? Their brain flips it to, does this idea feel aligned with my identity? Ask, is this theory scientifically accurate? They answer instead, does this match what people like me tend to believe? In that moment, truth takes a back seat to familiarity, and confidence becomes a costume that disguises substitution. The most haunting part? We never notice when it happens, because the substituted question feels so natural. The easier question is still similar to the hard one. It has emotional overlap, semantic resemblance, intuitive texture. So, the answer feels right. The confidence is real. But it's misplaced. You've answered the wrong question. Well, even experts are not immune. A judge may be asked, how likely is this person to commit a crime again? But they may answer instead, do I feel uneasy looking at this defendant? A doctor may be asked, what's the risk of this treatment? But answer, how do I feel about this patient's chances? In life or death decisions, the substitution trap still slips through, silent and undetected, wearing the mask of judgment. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel-winning psychologist, described this as answering an easier question than the one asked, without noticing the substitution. He called it one of the great illusions of intuitive thinking. It's not deception, it's automatic. It's cognitive misdirection performed by the very system that makes you feel rational. Let's break this further. You're at a party. Someone you admire says, "Do you think artificial intelligence will destroy humanity?" That question should trigger a deep exploration into technological forecasts, risks, and control structures. But your mind, like a nervous magician, swaps it with something digestible. Do I feel excited or afraid when I hear the phrase artificial intelligence? And so you answer emotionally, not factually. You say, "Yeah, probably," or "No, I doubt it," depending on what the word feels like to you, not what you know. This isn't a flaw of intelligence. It's a byproduct of being human. The human brain evolved for survival, not truth. It rewards speed over accuracy, certainty over doubt. It's far more concerned with feeling like you know what's going on than actually knowing what's going on. That's what makes the substitution trap so enduring. It saves energy. It feels good. And it fits neatly into the illusion that you are always aware of your own thinking. But you're not. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic and planning, often receives already processed emotional judgments from older, faster brain systems. So, by the time you think you're making a decision, your mind has already made a substitution. It's as if you were handed a fake ballot, marked in advance, and you cast it proudly thinking it's your own. Want to see this in yourself? Try this. Ask yourself, what should I do with my life? That's a big, terrifying, deeply abstract question, but watch what happens inside. Your mind starts looking for shortcuts. What do I enjoy? What are people expecting from me? What am I good at right now? These are not the same question, but they're easier to answer. And your brain eagerly delivers those answers, wrapped in confidence. The real question remains untouched, buried beneath a surface of pleasant distractions. The substitution trap doesn't just affect your thinking, it shapes your identity. Because your answers become part of who you are. You build beliefs based on substituted questions. You form relationships, careers, loyalties, all on the foundation of responses to questions you were never actually asked. So how do you escape? The truth is, you don't escape it completely, but you can start noticing the symptoms, start feeling for that internal ease that comes too fast, that confidence that arrives before contemplation. Ask yourself, did I actually answer the question, or just the version that felt better? Slow your thinking. Let discomfort breathe. Be suspicious of easy clarity in hard questions. When something feels obvious, ask yourself, obvious in what way? To whom? Why? Because in that moment of pause, you start catching the substitution before it finishes the swap. You start asking again, this time with your eyes open. The original question, the hard one, the one you almost avoided, that's the one that matters. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the truth has been hiding all along. Not in the answers you gave, but in the questions you never dared to hold. The introspection illusion. You wake up in the morning and feel a bit irritable. You tell yourself it's because you didn't sleep well. You skip breakfast and justify it by saying you're not that hungry. You procrastinate on an important task and claim it's because the timing isn't right. All of these explanations feel like truth. They arise in your mind fully formed, with conviction. But what if, beneath every confident justification, there's a hollow space? What if your reasoning is not the source of your actions, but a story invented after they were already in motion? This is the introspection illusion. The belief that we understand the inner workings of our minds, when in reality, most of what drives us is hidden. We live with the comforting illusion of transparency, that we know our own motives, desires, beliefs, and thoughts simply because they are ours. But the truth is, our conscious mind sees only the surface ripples, never the deep currents pulling beneath the frontier. In 1977, psychologists Richard Nisbett and Timothy DeCamp Wilson conducted a now famous experiment. They set up a table of identical pairs of nylon stockings and asked shoppers to pick the best quality. Nearly all participants chose the last pair on the right. When asked why, they gave logical answers. The texture was better, the weave finer, the elasticity perfect. But in truth, all the stockings were the same. The real reason? A known bias called the position effect. People prefer the item on the far right when viewing a sequence. Not one person mentioned the position. They didn't know they were being influenced. Yet they still gave confident, detailed justifications. Not lies, but guesses mistaken for truth. And this is not a rare glitch. This is your brain's default operating system. You might think your political beliefs come from reason and principle, but, when tested, many people adjust their views within minutes and then defend the altered belief with passionate certainty, as if it had always been theirs. You might believe you fell in love with someone because of their personality, their charm, their soul. But studies show people can develop romantic feelings simply by experiencing increased heart rate in their presence, like after walking across a shaky bridge. The emotion is real, but the explanation is fiction. This illusion doesn't mean you're unintelligent. In fact, it happens because your brain is so good at creating coherent stories. The mind is a meaning machine. It hates gaps. When a cause is missing, it creates one. When the reason is invisible, it paints one. Your brain is less a window into yourself and more like a press secretary, rationalizing decisions made behind closed doors. You eat another cookie and say, "I earned it." You cancel plans and say, "I need rest." But perhaps the real cause was emotion, fear, or unconscious association. An echo from childhood, a scent you barely noticed, a memory you didn't register. The introspection illusion doesn't just cloud small choices. It shapes your identity. You build a self-story around reasons you think are true, but that self is a mask stitched together by inference, not insight. Consider split brain patients, people who've had the corpus callosum between their brain hemispheres severed, often to treat severe epilepsy. In one experiment, a patient's left hemisphere, which controls language, was shown the word snow. The right hemisphere, controlling the left hand, was shown chicken. When asked to choose two images, one with each hand, the left hand picked a shovel, for snow, and the right hand picked a chicken. When asked why he chose those two, the patient said, "The chicken goes with the chicken claw, and I need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed." The left brain didn't see snow at all, but it invented a logical, coherent story that linked both answers. This is your brain on autopilot. Confident, coherent, completely wrong. You're not immune. None of us are. In daily life, you make decisions for reasons you don't understand, and then, seconds later, you invent explanations that feel absolutely real. Why do you prefer one brand over another? Why do you trust one person and not another? Why did you feel angry, sad, or hopeful at that moment? You may never know, but your mind will tell you a story, and you will believe it. This illusion is dangerous because it hides its own tracks. If you believe your self-understanding is accurate, then you're unlikely to question it. You'll fight to protect false narratives, defend mistaken motives, and judge others harshly for not seeing what you assume is obvious. You become blind to your own cognitive scaffolding. You mistake introspection for clarity, and your guesses for truth. But the real self lives in shadow, in reaction, in unconscious scripts inherited from culture, trauma, memory, or even evolutionary patterning. You might think you dislike someone for their attitude, but what if their posture, voice pitch, or resemblance to a childhood bully is what truly drives your discomfort? You might think you want success to feel fulfilled, but maybe you crave it to silence internal doubt, to gain approval you never received. And yet your mind will cover this with a more acceptable explanation. I'm just ambitious. This isn't a flaw to fix. It's a fact to face. The path forward is not perfect transparency. That's a myth. No amount of meditation or reflection will give you full access to the unconscious machinery of thought. But humility is power. When you accept that you don't know yourself fully, something liberating happens. You become more curious, more forgiving, more open to change. You start asking, what if I'm wrong about why I did that? You start noticing the stories you tell and questioning their authorship. You recognize how easily memory can rewrite motives, how quickly emotion can become explanation. And in that space between action and narration, between feeling and story, you find a kind of honesty that doesn't require certainty. It's tempting to believe that introspection reveals the soul's blueprint, but often, it reveals only the architect of illusion. Your mind shows you the map after you've already wandered off the path and pretends it was there all along. So the next time you're sure of your reasons, pause. Ask yourself, not with judgment, but with gentle curiosity, what else might be true? Because behind every confident explanation might lie a stranger version of you, one you've never met. One who acts first, explains later, and leaves your consciousness playing catch-up. In that mystery, there is both danger and freedom. The goalpost shift, you wanted something badly, a promotion, a milestone, a number on a screen. You told yourself, just that one thing and I'll be content, peaceful, fulfilled. But the moment you get it, quietly without warning, your mind mutates the rules. The finish line stretches out again, just out of reach. Now there's a better title, a higher salary, a bigger audience, a faster car. You've entered the loop. The target moves, and it always will. This is the goalpost shift. It doesn't scream or break you down violently. It seduces you with logic, whispers of growth, and promises of next. It disguises itself as ambition, as progress, as self-improvement. But behind that mask, it's a psychological trap, a mechanism buried deep in the architecture of your reward system that ensures satisfaction never fully lands, like chasing a horizon that keeps running ahead of you. You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're wired this way. Let's go deeper. The moment you achieve something, dopamine, a key neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, spikes. But here's the trick. Dopamine isn't released when you receive a reward. It's released in anticipation of it. Your brain doesn't actually want the thing. It wants the chase. And as soon as the reward is claimed, the chemical high drops, flatline. So the only way to feel that surge again, find another goal, shift the post, repeat. This is why lottery winners often end up more depressed, why some billionaires still feel like they haven't made it, why athletes spiral after reaching the pinnacle of their careers. The goal they obsessed over, fought for, centered their identity around, it finally arrives. And yet, it doesn't deliver the lasting fulfillment they imagined, because their brain already started scanning for the next mountain to climb. It quietly whispered, "That wasn't enough. Look over there." And we listen. The shift happens in subtle ways. You finish writing the book you dreamed of publishing, but now you're obsessing over bestseller lists. You land your dream job, but a month later, someone else's office looks nicer. You hit your fitness goal, but the mirror reflects new flaws. You get the person you thought would complete you, but now their attention doesn't feel like enough. Satisfaction leaks. The target moves, and you tell yourself, this is growth. This is ambition. You believe, with conviction, that wanting more is a sign of drive, of life. But when your desire is never allowed to rest, when no victory tastes sweet for long, when your joy is always deferred to the next milestone, it's not ambition anymore. It's addiction. You are no longer climbing towards something. You're running from the silence that waits at the top. The part where you have to ask, what now? This isn't your fault. Evolution has hard-coded this loop into your biology. In the ancestral world, complacency could get you killed. Those who felt restless after success were more likely to keep hunting, building, defending. It kept our species alive. But in the modern world, this wiring collides with infinite choices, endless metrics, social comparisons, and hyper-visible lives. So now, no matter how much you accomplish, the world offers a million reminders of what you haven't. It's not just personal, it's systemic. Corporations exploit the goalpost shift. Every app, every platform, every productivity tool is designed to stimulate the chase. You hit a follower count, now aim for a badge. You finish a course, now unlock the next tier. Algorithms drip feed rewards just enough to keep you craving more, but never enough to feel complete. The system feeds your hunger, but starves your soul. Even childhood is infected. A child draws for joy, but soon, it's about likes. They play for fun, but now it's trophies. We don't grow out of this. We grow deeper into it. School grades become salaries. Stickers become status. And without realizing, we internalize a belief so quiet, it hides in plain sight. If I'm not striving, I'm failing. But what if striving itself is the thing that keeps you distant from joy? Some of us try to break the loop by setting bigger goals. Others try minimalism, detachment, or spiritual bypassing. But here's the truth. The goalpost will shift unless you catch it in the act. Unless you stop mid-chase and ask, why am I running? Who told me this was the prize? Did I want this, or was I sold this? You might realize you've been chasing someone else's dream, or that what you thought you wanted was just a placeholder for something deeper: connection, safety, love, meaning. But the brain doesn't naturally aim for meaning. It aims for patterns that keep dopamine flowing. It's a reward junkie. And it doesn't care if the chase makes you tired, anxious, or empty inside. And so, we return to the same question. How do you escape? Start by noticing the shift. Each time you feel that hollow thud after a win, listen to it. Don't rush to fill it with the next ambition. Sit in the quiet. That unease is the beginning of clarity. It's where you stop being a puppet of the loop and start becoming a witness. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to want without needing? To strive without starving? To let a moment be enough? Not forever, but just long enough to honor it? Try this. Think of something you once deeply wanted. Go back to that version of you, before it came true. Can you remember the yearning? The hunger? Now, compare it to the moment you got it. How long did that joy last? Did you savor it? Or did the target shift too fast? Now think of someone who has everything you think you want. Fame, money, recognition. Look closer, and you'll see it. Many of them are still haunted by the same hunger. Because the loop doesn't end when you arrive. It ends when you decide to stop running. You are allowed to want more, but not because you're incomplete, not because your worth depends on the next achievement. Want more because you are already full, not empty. Grow from overflow, not lack. Otherwise, you'll spend your entire life moving goalposts for a game that never ends. This isn't about giving up on dreams. It's about reclaiming the right to pause, to savor, to say, this is good, without adding, but not enough. You can still aim high. Just stop letting your peace be held hostage by targets that run when you reach them, because the loop will never tell you to stop. The system will never let you rest. The world will keep whispering that your value lives in the next thing. But the truth is, it's always been right here, in the stillness between milestones, in the breath between climbs. Catch the shift. Name it. Refuse to run unless it's towards something real. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize the chase was never the prize. The rationalization reflex. They say we are rational beings, that we weigh facts, compare evidence, and make logical decisions. But that idea, while comforting, is a beautiful lie. A clever myth whispered to us by the part of the brain that wants to believe it's in charge. In truth, most of our decisions are born in silence, deep within the emotional core of the mind, long before logic ever gets a turn to speak. The rationalization reflex is not some rare psychological defect. It's the default setting of the human mind. You make choices emotionally, then retrofit a story around those choices. A story that feels intelligent, deliberate, and reasoned. But it's not. It's reverse-engineered fiction. Imagine you're in a store. You see a pair of shoes. Your heart leaps. You don't know why, but they feel right. You pick them up, turn them over in your hands. Maybe the brand seems trustworthy. Maybe the color reminds you of someone you miss. You don't know it yet, but the decision has already been made. In the emotional brain, it's a done deal. The logic, that comes afterward. I need new shoes anyway. They're on sale. They're built to last. You stack reasons like bricks to build a rational fortress, but the decision came from somewhere else entirely. This is not weakness, it's design. The human brain evolved not to be correct, but to survive, to act quickly in the face of risk. In the wild, if a rustle in the bushes stirred fear, hesitation could mean death. Logic is slow. Emotion is fast. Emotion acted as the first responder, the bodyguard of survival. But in a modern world filled with complexity, nuance, and choices that rarely involve mortal danger, this ancient reflex leads us astray. And then, like a loyal servant, logic arrives, not to challenge, but to explain, justify, and decorate the emotional decision already made. The rationalization reflex is not just about shoes, or impulse purchases, or guilty pleasures. It governs the deepest decisions of our lives. Who we love, who we hate, what we believe, what we defend. We like to think we support causes because we've researched them, that our political leanings arise from careful analysis, that our religious or spiritual beliefs were reached through introspection and philosophical rigor. But study after study shows the opposite. People often choose what feels right, what aligns with their upbringing, their identity, or their emotions, and then go hunting for reasons to support it. When challenged, they don't revise their belief. They revise their justification. The story changes. The core decision does not. This reflex is so powerful, we don't even notice it. We mistake our explanations for truth. But here's the trap. If we're not aware of it, we become prisoners of our own unexamined feelings. We call it reasoning, but it's really storytelling, performed to an audience of one. Take, for example, the infamous first impression. You meet someone for 5 seconds. Something in their tone, their face, their scent, triggers a subtle emotional response. You don't even realize it, but you've already judged them. Your brain quietly decides, like or dislike. Then comes the flood of logic. He seems confident. She was too dismissive. He didn't make eye contact. These reasons feel objective, even intelligent, but they are the children of an emotional parent. You're not using logic to choose. You're using logic to explain the choice already made by instinct. Now imagine this on a larger scale. A hiring manager interviews a candidate. Something about the applicant sparks warmth, a smile, a voice, an energy. The emotional brain makes its call. This person is good. And suddenly the resume seems stronger. The flaws seem forgivable. Rationalizations bloom. They have leadership potential. They'll grow into the role. But it's not reason leading the way. It's loyalty to an emotional decision. It gets darker. In the courtroom. In the classroom. In the voting booth. Jurors convinced of someone's guilt before the first piece of evidence is shown. Teachers grading more harshly when irritated by a student's tone. Voters choosing candidates based on charm, then justifying it with policy. We are not logical creatures who sometimes feel. We are feeling creatures who sometimes think. The rationalization reflex isn't a glitch, it's the script behind the scenes. And yet, we feel certain. We feel sure. That's the cruelest twist of all. The brain rewards us with confidence after a rationalization, even when the logic is paper thin. Because certainty is useful in social survival. If you sound confident, others are more likely to follow you. So the brain boosts your belief, not because it's correct, but because it increases influence. This is why you can feel completely certain about something that is completely wrong. Consider an argument between two people with opposing beliefs. Both are armed with facts, articles, personal stories. Both are sure they're right, but neither is actually debating the truth. They are defending emotional identities, wrapped in logic like armor. The facts are not tools of discovery. They are weapons of confirmation. Each person leaves more convinced than they were before. Why? Because rationalization feels like understanding. It scratches the itch of certainty without ever exposing the root. Even our memories are shaped by this reflex. You break up with someone. It hurts. But over time, your brain tells a new story. They were toxic. They never supported me. These things might be partially true, but they are also comfort stories. Rationalizations to protect the heart from chaos. You weren't abandoned. You made the right choice. You didn't fail. It wasn't meant to be. The emotional decision came first. The reasoning was stitched together later, like patches on a wound. So, what can we do about it? First, we can notice. That alone is powerful. To pause and ask, not, why did I do this, but when did I feel this way first? Trace the emotion. Watch the story form around it. Recognize that your reasons might be justifications, not foundations. Second, we can build systems that slow us down. Deliberation, debate, feedback from people we trust who don't think like us. Structures that delay the emotional reflex just long enough to let reason in, not as a servant, but as a challenger. And finally, we can practice the rarest form of intelligence, humility. To admit that we don't always know why we believe what we believe. To accept that our minds are not temples of logic, but echo chambers of emotion, dressed in the robes of reason. That doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. But the most dangerous thing we can do is ignore it. To believe that our rationalizations are truths, that our feelings are facts, that our stories are reality. Because once that line blurs, we stop learning, we stop listening, we stop growing. We become characters in our own delusion, performing a script we never wrote, while convincing ourselves that every line was intentional. The rationalization reflex is not an error. It's a mirror, one that reflects not who we think we are, but what our minds quietly are always doing. It whispers, "You made the choice long ago, now go write the reasons." And most of us do, without ever questioning the author. The Clarity Mirage. You read the article, you watched the video, you even nodded along. You felt a flash of recognition, a surge of clarity, as if something just clicked. But hours later, when asked to explain it in your own words, everything dissolved. The clarity was gone. The insight slipped through your fingers like water. This is the Clarity Mirage. It's the illusion that you've understood something simply because you've consumed it. That comprehension happened just because your eyes saw the words, your ears heard the sounds, or your mind momentarily echoed the idea. But passive clarity is not understanding. It's comfort disguised as knowledge. Real understanding doesn't live in the moment of exposure. It lives in the silence afterward, in the stillness. When you try to recreate the ideas alone, and suddenly you find gaps, pieces missing. The connection that felt so obvious before is now distant. The metaphor that made sense is blurry. You can't quite get back to the thought you were so sure you understood. This is the truth. Comprehension isn't measured by what you remember hearing, but by what you can rebuild without help. Your brain loves shortcuts. It rewards the feeling of understanding, not the effort of building understanding. When you listen to a speaker explain a complex theory, say quantum entanglement or cognitive bias, their polished language and metaphors give you the illusion that the idea is simple, but it's not your clarity. It's theirs. You're borrowing their mental scaffolding. You're holding their flashlight. Turn the flashlight off, and the shadows return. You mistake fluency for mastery. Just because something is easy to follow doesn't mean it's easy to reproduce. That's why you can feel enlightened watching a 5-minute breakdown of Stoicism or game theory or artificial intelligence, and yet fail to explain it to a friend 2 hours later. You don't lack intelligence. You fell for the Clarity Mirage. It's a psychological bias, what researchers call the illusion of explanatory depth. We think we know more than we do because we underestimate the complexity of ideas when presented smoothly. A faucet seems simple until you're asked to describe how water flows through your home's plumbing system. Suddenly the gaps become obvious. That discomfort is real understanding trying to be born. It's painful. It's humbling. And it almost never happens in the moment of consumption. True comprehension only emerges when you're alone with the silence. No guide, no cues, just you and the idea. And the question, can I teach this back from scratch? Because if you can't explain it, you don't truly understand it. And most of the time, we can't. But we rarely test ourselves that way. Why? Because it's uncomfortable, because it exposes weakness, because the act of rephrasing, of reconstructing an idea from fragments, shows us how shallow our mental models really are. We want the illusion more than we want the truth. It feels good to believe we're learning quickly. It feels good to feel smart. So we binge videos, we speed read books, we scroll through quote threads, and with each bite-sized flash of insight, we stack up the illusion that we've grown. But growth isn't passive, and clarity isn't proof. Think about the last time you truly understood something. Not just recognized it, but owned it. You probably wrestled with it. You had to sit with it. Turn it over in your head. Try, fail, try again. Real comprehension doesn't feel fast. It feels slow, frustrating, even boring at times. That's how you know it's real. Ask yourself, if no one else explained it to me, could I explain it to someone else, without notes, without phrases I memorized? That's the test. Not how clearly someone teaches you, but how clearly you can teach yourself. And there's another layer. The more you fall for the Clarity Mirage, the more you overestimate your preparedness. Students study by rereading notes, highlighting, watching lectures again. They feel confident because the ideas look familiar. But familiarity isn't understanding, it's recognition. Passive, hollow. Then the test comes, and silence falls, and the mind goes blank. Because they never practiced retrieval. They never built the idea from nothing. And in the real world, you don't get to reread the notes before every challenge. That's why silence matters. That's why struggling alone with an idea is not a waste of time. It's the only way to make it truly yours. Next time something feels clear, stop, step away, close the book, turn off the video. Now try to explain it, out loud, write it down. Use your own language, not theirs. If the idea survives, good. If it collapses, better. Now you know where the real work begins, because understanding isn't the moment you nod, it's the moment you stumble and build anyway. You are not a vessel to be filled, You are a furnace where concepts are forged. Clarity is not the end, it's the invitation. And the silence is where the real learning begins. The belief anchor effect. You're walking into a room full of strangers. You meet someone, let's call him Daniel. He smiles, offers a firm handshake, and says something clever. Instantly, without effort, your brain sets a foundation. Daniel seems smart and trustworthy. That's it. Anchor dropped. You don't know his history. You don't know his intentions. You barely know his name. But from that single moment, the first impression, your brain builds a scaffold, and everything you learn from that point forward bends to fit that initial frame. This is the belief anchor effect. Once an idea takes root in your mind, especially through a vivid or emotional first impression, every new piece of information gets filtered through it, distorted by it, shaped to support it. And the scariest part? You don't even notice it happening. Think of it like pouring water into a mold. No matter how clean or pure the water is, it takes the shape of whatever container it enters. In your mind, that container is the anchor. And once it's set, truth itself becomes flexible, warped not by reality, but by what you believed first. Let's say someone tells you a teacher at your school is unfair. You've never met them, but now the anchor is dropped. The next time you hear that teacher gave someone a bad grade, your mind nods. See? Unfair. But if someone else tells you that same teacher mentored a struggling student for free, your brain might dismiss it. Well, maybe they had a reason. The same fact, filtered two ways, depending on the anchor that was set first. And this isn't just about people. It's about beliefs, politics, health, science, everything. Imagine you read a headline that says, "New study finds coffee causes cancer." It shocks you. The emotion sticks. Days later, another study shows coffee might actually prevent heart disease. But that doesn't sink in the same way. Why? Because the first impression, the cancer warning, anchored your belief. Now, every new coffee fact must swim against that current. You aren't absorbing information anymore. You're reshaping it to preserve your original belief. It's not about logic. It's about stability. Your brain hates chaos. It prefers consistency, even if that means bending facts to maintain a coherent internal story. That's why, once a belief is anchored, you don't want to be wrong. So you twist interpretations, ignore contradictions, or cherry-pick supportive details to protect that fragile mental structure. This is how misinformation survives. Not because people are stupid, but because they're anchored. If someone believes a certain medicine is dangerous, any future evidence, even if carefully researched, will be scrutinized through the lens of defense. That's why fake news headlines, once seen, are hard to unsee. The emotional first exposure is the hook, and truth has to fight uphill after that. This happens early in childhood too. A kid hears a story that dogs are dangerous. That story becomes a belief. Now, every bark reinforces it. Every growl confirms it. Even playful dogs get misinterpreted as threatening. And decades later, that belief might still live inside them, untouched by experience, untethered from truth, but real in its power. And the belief anchor doesn't fade easily with time. In fact, the longer it remains, the stronger it gets. Because each day, your brain finds new ways to reinforce it. Each supporting thought adds another layer of cement. You don't even see the anchor anymore. You see the world through it. This is especially haunting when it comes to self-beliefs. If someone tells you when you're young, you're not creative, that might become your anchor. Now, every mistake in art class reinforces it. Every time you struggle to come up with an idea, it echoes. See? Not creative, you stop trying, you stop exploring. And you never learn that creativity isn't something you are, it's something you practice. The anchor didn't just shape your view, it shaped your future. Or maybe you anchored the belief that you're unworthy of love. Not because it's true, but because someone treated you that way. And now, every compliment feels fake. Every genuine connection feels suspicious. Your mind warps those moments to protect the anchor, even if it destroys your chances at happiness. The belief anchor effect is not about holding bad ideas. It's about how easily good minds can trap themselves in cages built from first impressions. Because anchoring doesn't ask your permission. It just happens. You hear a claim once. You experience a moment once. And that single exposure becomes the foundation of your future perception. Even when new facts arrive, louder, better, truer, they feel like intruders. They don't match the anchor, So your brain defends what it already knows. It defends the lie, because that lie feels safe. That's how people can hold contradictory beliefs. It's not hypocrisy, it's inertia. Mental loyalty to a first impression. So, how do you fight it? The first step is to notice when you're defending something too quickly. Ask yourself, why do I believe this? What was the first time I heard or felt this? Am I open to being wrong about it? Most people skip that step. They feel challenged and dig deeper. But if you pause, if you become suspicious of your own certainty, you start loosening the anchor. And once it loosens, truth can slip in. It might feel like betrayal to rethink a belief you've held for years, but it's not betrayal, it's liberation. The truth was never supposed to be frozen. It was supposed to grow with you. So the next time you feel sure, absolutely certain, pause. Ask yourself, what was the first moment this belief began? If it started with a headline, a rumor, a bad day, a single experience, then maybe, just maybe, that belief isn't the full story. Maybe it's just the anchor, and maybe it's time to lift it. The familiarity trap. You trust what you know, you prefer what feels familiar, and without realizing it, you begin to confuse repetition with truth. This is the familiarity trap, your brain's quiet shortcut for survival that slowly rewires your beliefs, your decisions, and even your sense of reality. You see a product again and again, and soon it feels reliable. You hear a rumor more than once, and it begins to sound true. You encounter the same face, the same voice, the same slogan, and even if you disagreed the first time, repetition starts to wear you down. It's not logic. It's not evidence. It's exposure. This glitch in the mind has a name, the mere exposure effect. Psychologist Robert Zajonc revealed that repeated exposure to a stimulus increases people's liking for it. It doesn't matter if it's a nonsense word, a foreign symbol, or a distorted photo. See it enough times, and you start to prefer it. Your brain equates ease with truth. If something is easy to process, it feels more right. And what makes something easier? Familiarity. The second, third, or 10th time you encounter something, your brain processes it faster. That fluency feels smooth. That smoothness feels correct. And suddenly, your preference shifts, not because of reason, but because of repetition. Think about advertising. Why do companies pour billions into running the same ad over and over again? Why are political slogans repeated in endless loops? Because they're not trying to convince you. They're trying to make you comfortable. Comfortable enough that you stop asking questions. Comfortable enough that disagreement feels unfamiliar, and therefore wrong. But familiarity doesn't just sell products. It shapes your worldview. If the same opinion is repeated by enough people, from enough angles, in enough headlines, it starts to feel like common sense, even if it's baseless. This is how misinformation spreads. Not because it's persuasive, but because it's persistent. The more a lie circulates, the more plausible it seems. Not because you evaluate it, but because it doesn't feel foreign anymore. This trap isn't just external. It runs through your personal life too. You might return to a toxic relationship, not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. You might cling to a self-image that limits you, not because it's accurate, but because it's known. People stay in jobs that drain them, cities that stifle them, habits that hurt them, not because they are fulfilling, but because change feels like danger and routine feels like safety. Even your internal dialogue falls victim to this. If you've told yourself for years that you're not good enough, or that you'll always fail, those thoughts become familiar. And because they're familiar, they begin to feel true. You stop questioning them, you stop noticing them. They fade into the background hum of your identity and guide your choices silently. This is the danger of the familiarity trap. It masquerades as intuition. It convinces you that what you've seen most is what's safest. But safety isn't truth, comfort isn't clarity, and repetition is not wisdom. Look at how this plays out in history. Harmful ideologies don't rise overnight. They drip into culture slowly. One speech, one headline, one symbol, then again and again, until what was once shocking becomes normalized, until people no longer flinch, until lies are remembered longer than facts, simply because they were louder or more consistent. That's the dark side of your brain's need for efficiency. It doesn't want to weigh every claim or test every belief. It wants to survive. And in the ancestral past, familiarity did mean safety. The known bush was less likely to contain a predator. The familiar face was less likely to betray. But in the modern world, this instinct misfires. Now, the loudest message isn't always the truest. The most repeated claim isn't always the most honest. And the most familiar habit might be the one holding you back. So, how do you escape? You start by noticing. Notice when your preference feels automatic. Ask yourself, do I really agree with this, or is it just what I've heard the most? Am I drawn to this idea because it resonates, or just because it repeats? Be suspicious of ease. If something feels too smooth, too obvious, too unquestioned, examine it, especially if it's been with you a long time. Familiar thoughts are the ones least likely to be inspected, but most likely to be outdated. Expose yourself to difference, new voices, unfamiliar cultures, challenging opinions. It won't feel natural. At first, it will feel wrong. But wrongness is often just unfamiliarity in disguise. And once you've seen that trick, you begin to see through it. The mind seeks comfort, but growth doesn't. Growth lives in the unknown, the difficult, the uncomfortable. To break the familiarity, trap is to walk willingly into the foreign, to resist the reflex, to return to what simply feels safe. Repetition is not truth, and the loudest voice is not always the wisest. So be careful what you hear again and again, because the more you hear it, the more it owns you, even if it's false. The detail swamp bias. You sit down to solve a problem. Maybe it's a life decision, maybe it's a creative project, maybe it's just a conversation that went wrong. But instead of stepping back and asking the big questions, your mind begins to tunnel. You zoom in, you pick at the wording of a text, the color of a button, the tone of a single sentence, the specific day something happened. And you convince yourself that clarity will arrive once you crack these tiny fragments. But it doesn't, because you're stuck in the detail swamp. This is the detail swamp bias, the cognitive illusion, where you confuse focus with insight, mistaking magnification for mastery. Your brain, desperate for control, narrows its gaze to irrelevant minutiae. It feels productive. It feels like you're analyzing. But in reality, you're drowning. You're losing the forest to count leaves on a single tree. It happens everywhere. A startup spends weeks perfecting its logo while ignoring the flawed business model. A student triple checks formatting on a paper they don't understand. A couple argues over a tone of voice instead of confronting emotional distance. A team debates slide colors instead of the strategy that's failing. Detail becomes a distraction, an escape, a sedative. But why does the mind do this? Because details feel safe. Big picture thinking is frightening. It demands you confront uncertainty, ambiguity, responsibility. It's open-ended. It requires letting go of illusion and facing truth. But details give you the illusion of progress. You can tweak, measure, compare. You can keep moving without actually changing anything. Your brain's executive system, the part responsible for planning and reflection, loves certainty. When uncertainty spikes, your stress levels rise. So, to reduce this discomfort, your mind zooms in. It starts fiddling. You fixate on formatting instead of messaging. You clean your desk instead of starting the project. You analyze tone instead of intent. It's not laziness. It's avoidance dressed as diligence. In psychology, this is closely linked to cognitive tunneling, a phenomenon where your focus narrows so much under pressure that you miss critical, broader cues. Pilots under stress, for example, have been known to obsess over a single malfunction light while failing to notice they're running out of fuel. It's not stupidity. It's biology. The detail swamp is especially dangerous in an era of data overload. Every app, every platform, every metric trains your attention toward precision. You know your follower count, your views per minute, your exact engagement rate, but do you remember why you started, what you wanted to say, who you're becoming? The granular has eaten the grand, and social comparison fuels the trap. You see someone else's success and start zooming into your own flaws. You nitpick your own work, thinking if you just fix this one little thing, you'll finally feel worthy. But you won't. Because you're not fixing the right problem. You're polishing the outside of a cracked foundation. Let's take an example. Imagine a writer stuck on the opening sentence of their book. They rewrite it a dozen times, change commas, debate synonyms for hours. But the real issue is, they don't know what the book is truly about. They're lost in the detail swamp because they're afraid to admit they're lost in the story. It's easier to fix the sentence than face the structure. Or take a relationship. You fixate on how your partner forgot to say goodnight. You replay the moment, analyze it, assume meaning, but you ignore the broader drift, that you haven't connected emotionally in weeks. Zooming in lets you avoid what zooming out would force you to feel. Even therapy isn't immune. A person might spend session after session dissecting their week, every interaction, every slip-up, without ever touching their childhood, their patterns, their worldview. Because the moment they zoom out, everything changes. And that's terrifying. But it's also where healing begins. So, how do you escape the detail swamp? First, catch the feeling. When you find yourself stuck, editing, tweaking, fiddling, pause. Ask, is this a detail or a direction? Am I solving the root or smoothing the surface? Second, zoom out deliberately. Take the wide-angle lens. Ask the hardest questions. What is the real problem? What am I afraid to look at? What would this look like if I were 10,000 feet above it? That perspective often reveals what the microscope hides. Third, reframe progress. Not as perfection in detail, but as movement in meaning. A conversation that ends in tears might be more valuable than 100 surface-level chats. A rough draft that exposes your fear is more powerful than a polished lie. Fourth, seek disconfirming evidence. The detail swamp thrives on self-justification. You think you're being precise, objective, but often you're just reinforcing your biases with tiny proofs. Ask someone outside your situation. What do they see when they look at the whole? It may unsettle you, but that's how you know it matters. The goal is not to reject details. Details matter, but they are not the truth. They are echoes of it. Tools, not masters. Use them to build, but never let them drown your vision, because a life spent obsessing over shadows will never see the shape they belong to. And if you're not careful, the swamp becomes comfortable, familiar. You start to believe that precision equals meaning, that tweaking is building, that zooming in is thinking. But the truth is, the bigger picture can't be seen under a microscope. You have to rise, risk, step back, and sometimes walk away from the tiny, perfect thing to make space for the messy, beautiful whole. You are not here to count pixels. You are here to see the image. And the moment you remember that, the swamp starts to drain. The emotion bleed over. You wake up late. The alarm didn't go off. You spill your coffee, you stub your toe, you mutter under your breath and storm out the door. But then, later, when your friend forgets to respond to a message, you feel personally attacked. When a stranger cuts you off in traffic, your anger explodes. When your partner asks an innocent question, you snap. The truth is, your friend didn't do anything wrong. The driver wasn't being malicious. Your partner didn't deserve the recoil. But something inside you already decided the world was unfair. And now, everything else is tinted with that first emotion. This is the emotion bleed over. A phenomenon where one feeling leaks into another situation, where emotion spreads like ink through water, distorting every perception until it all feels true, even when it isn't. This isn't just a mood swing. It's a cognitive distortion, one that silently reroutes your logic, sabotages your memory, and warps your sense of cause and effect. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't announce its presence. You don't say, I am angry about X, therefore I am misjudging Y. No. You believe that Y is the problem, that this person is to blame, that this situation justifies how you feel, but the source of the emotion came from somewhere else entirely. Often from hours ago, sometimes from years ago. Your feelings aren't just influencing reality, they're rewriting it. Take a common example. You're stressed at work. Deadlines pile up. A supervisor criticizes you in front of others. You hold it in. You don't explode. You stay professional. But then, at home, your child spills a glass of water. Something so trivial, and suddenly you yell. Not because of the water, but because your nervous system is still carrying the heat of humiliation, frustration, and helplessness. That unprocessed tension needs a release, and your brain tricks you into believing the present moment is the right target. Emotion bleeds over, and now the child, confused and hurt, becomes part of the chain reaction. This reflex is so ingrained we hardly notice. Your body remembers how it felt to be disrespected in the morning meeting, and now, hours later, your interpretation of unrelated events is distorted through that unresolved emotional lens. Your friend being late becomes, they don't value me. A minor inconvenience becomes nothing ever goes right. A neutral face becomes they're obviously judging me. But none of those things are objectively true. They just feel true because the emotion has infected the lens. This doesn't just affect anger. Anxiety bleeds too. You worry about finances and suddenly you perceive your relationship as unstable, or you feel lonely, and that ache morphs into suspicion toward your friends. Even joy can bleed over. If you're elated after receiving good news, you might overlook a red flag in someone's behavior, attributing positivity where caution is needed. Emotion doesn't respect boundaries. It spills, it stains, it's sticky. And here's the terrifying part. The more intense the emotion, the more real the misinterpretation feels. Your brain is wired to trust emotional signals as evidence. You think, if I feel this strongly, it must be true. That belief becomes the foundation for new behavior. You lash out, withdraw, accuse, overreact, not because the situation demands it, but because your emotional residue is playing puppeteer. It controls your tone, your perception, your memory, and worst of all, it convinces you that you're being rational. This is why arguments spiral, why someone who had a bad day walks into a room and poisons the entire mood without saying a word, why a single unresolved emotion can ruin relationships, careers, and self-worth. We don't see the bleed, we only see the aftermath and call it truth. Let's go deeper. Emotion bleed over isn't just psychological, it's neurological. When you experience a strong emotion, your amygdala lights up. Your brain goes into a state of heightened awareness, fight, flight, or freeze. This state doesn't just affect how you feel, it alters your memory recall, your attention, even your interpretation of faces and tone. If you're angry, you're more likely to remember events that match that anger. If you're sad, you'll notice cues that affirm your sadness. Your brain selectively retrieves and processes information that supports the current mood, creating a feedback loop. This loop is not logical, it's chemical, and it's relentless. This is how you can start the day fine and end it feeling like your whole life is falling apart, when really, only one thing went wrong. One unresolved emotion quietly infected every other area of your awareness. The tragedy is not the feeling itself. It's how unnoticed and unchecked it becomes your reality. It doesn't whisper, "This is temporary." It screams, "This is the world." And we react to that world. We make decisions based on it. We say things we can't unsay. We end relationships we didn't need to end. We punish the wrong people. We sabotage opportunities because the emotion told us a story. And we listened. This phenomenon isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's subtle. The partner who seems distant, not because they are, but because you're carrying abandonment from your past. The job that feels unsatisfying, not because it is, but because your fear of failure colors every task with dread. The friend who seems disloyal, not because they are, but because your trust has already been shattered by someone else. Emotion bleed over tricks us into reliving past trauma in present tense. So, how do we stop it? The first step is awareness, to pause, to ask, what emotion am I carrying right now? And where did it actually come from? If you can name the source, you can isolate the reaction. You can respond with intention instead of being swept into the illusion. You begin to realize, this thing that happened now didn't cause this feeling. It just touched something already waiting to erupt. Second, build emotional hygiene. Just like you wash your hands, clear your inbox, or reset your mind with sleep, you need to process what you feel. Journaling, meditation, deep breathing, conscious movement. These aren't just trends, they're containment strategies. They stop the emotion from leaking into unrelated moments. Third, don't trust every thought when you're in a strong emotional state. Feelings are valid, but not always accurate. The voice in your head that says, they don't care about you, you'll never succeed, this always happens to you. That voice may not be speaking truth. It may be speaking pain. And pain has a habit of lying in a very convincing tone. Finally, offer grace, to others and to yourself. You never know what someone else's emotion is bleeding over into your interaction. That cold response, that missed text, that strange tone, it might not be about you at all. It might be the echo of something else entirely. The emotion bleed over is a powerful force. It shapes how we interpret, how we remember, how we react. But it doesn't have to own us. We can notice it, name it, detach from it, and in doing so, reclaim clarity from the fog of misattributed emotion. Because the moment you realize your feelings are not facts is the moment you begin to see the world, not as your emotion paints it, but as it actually is. The role identity lock. At first, it was just a role, something you stepped into when needed. A job title, a personality in a friend group, a way of speaking around certain people, a survival mode. You wore it like clothing. But the longer you wore it, the more it shaped you. The more often you repeated it, the more it repeated you. And one day, you forgot you ever had the choice. That's the role identity lock. The subtle, irreversible moment when a role stops being a costume and becomes your skin. When pretending becomes habit. Habit becomes character. And character becomes fate. It doesn't start with deception, it starts with necessity. You become the responsible one, the strong one, the smart one, the funny one, the one who never cries, the one who always shows up, and you get rewarded for it. People thank you, admire you, expect it from you, so you do it again and again, until the performance is no longer conscious, until the mask molds to your bones, and then something changes. You no longer remember who you were before the role began. The brain adapts. Neurons wire together. You stop distinguishing between the version of you that others see and the one buried underneath. The distinction fades, and slowly, the actor forgets there was ever a script. This is not just psychological, it's biological. The more you rehearse a behavior, the more it ingrains itself into your neural architecture. Like paths in a forest, each repetition deepens the trail. Eventually, it becomes the only way forward, and if someone asks you to step off it, you hesitate because it feels wrong, even if it's the truth. Maybe you were the peacekeeper in your family. You absorbed tension, buffered conflict, carried weight that wasn't yours. It was a role, a quiet, invisible one. But over time, it became who you are. You say things like, "I don't like conflict," or "I'm just an easygoing person." But are you? Or did the role become the definition? Or maybe you were the achiever, the fixer, the golden child. Every success fed the image. So you stopped showing cracks, you learned to smile on cue, to perform stability, even when breaking inside. And now, the idea of failing, or being lost, or not knowing who you are, feels like betrayal. Not of yourself, but of the role. You're not alone. Everyone wears masks, but not everyone remembers their masks. And the danger is not in wearing one, it's in forgetting you ever put it on. Because once identity calcifies, growth becomes threatening. If you've always been the one who never needs help, asking for it feels like a flaw. If you've always been the stoic one, feeling deeply starts to feel unsafe. If your identity is rooted in being the successful one, failure doesn't just hurt, it destroys you. The brain resists this dissonance. It protects the role. It filters out evidence that doesn't match. It rewrites memories. It surrounds you with people who reinforce the script. And when you try to break character, you feel alone, rejected, afraid. So most people don't. They stay locked. And the saddest part? The world praises them for it. You're so dependable. You're always calm. You've got it all figured out. But the applause is for the role, not the soul beneath it. The role becomes a prison, and you, the original you, becomes a ghost in your own life. But there's a way out. It starts with noticing, with asking quietly, who would I be if no one was watching? What parts of me have I silenced to keep playing this role? What would I say or feel or change if I believed I was allowed to? The answers won't come easily, because masks don't come off cleanly. They leave marks, impressions, shadows, and sometimes, even after you remove them, you still feel them clinging to your skin. But freedom doesn't come from pretending you've never worn a role. It comes from choosing, consciously, whether to keep it, reshape it, or, finally, let it go. Not all roles are lies. Some are sacred. Some are gifts. But even a gift can become a burden if you forget it was ever optional. So pause. Look inward. Who are you beneath the identity others expect? Beneath the version of you that's most efficient, most praised, most admired? And if you don't know, that's not failure. That's the first sign you're waking up. Because identity should be a canvas, not a cage. A pattern you choose, not one carved into you by repetition and reward. And the moment you remember that, the lock begins to loosen. You don't have to shatter your life. You don't need to reject everything, but you do need to ask, what part of this is me? And what part is just the role I played so long that I forgot how to stop? You are more than any title, any trait, any script. You are not the role. You are the actor. You are not the identity. You are the author. And you can begin rewriting anytime, even now. The Overconfidence Syndrome. You sit across from someone who speaks with absolute certainty. They tell you what's wrong with the economy, how to fix the education system, why a specific medicine works, and what causes global warming, without a flicker of hesitation. Their confidence is magnetic, their voice unwavering. But if you ask a true expert in any of those fields, their answer might begin with, "It depends," or "That's complicated," or even, "I'm not sure." This isn't modesty, it's reality. This is the Overconfidence Syndrome, a paradox baked into human psychology. The less someone knows about a subject, the more likely they are to overestimate how much they understand. And the more someone genuinely understands, the more experience, knowledge, nuance they hold, the more likely they are to doubt their own grasp. Because the deeper you go into truth, the more complex everything becomes. It's not a joke. It's not just arrogance. It's cognitive miswiring. When you know very little, the edges of your ignorance are invisible. You don't see what you don't know. So your mind paints a complete picture using just a few puzzle pieces, and it feels whole. That's the illusion. You believe the image is clear because you're missing all the messy parts that would complicate it. The brain loves simplicity. It feels safe. This leads to a haunting imbalance, loud voices with shallow roots, whispering over forests of hard-earned wisdom. Take the Dunning-Kruger effect, a phenomenon identified by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. They found that people with low ability in a domain tend to overestimate their competence, while those with high ability tend to underestimate it. It's not just ironic, it's systemic. Those who know the least often feel the most confident. You might see it on social media. Someone reads a headline and suddenly they're an expert. They haven't read the study. They haven't questioned their source. But they speak like prophets, not because they are malicious, because they genuinely believe they understand. That belief is built on a tiny hill of knowledge, and from that hilltop, the world looks small. But real expertise, it humbles you. The doctor who's treated hundreds of cases knows how strange the body can be. The physicist who's studied quantum mechanics knows how unknowable it still is. The historian who's read 10,000 pages knows how fragile truth becomes across time. Real knowledge expands your vision and shows you how much more lies beyond it. But there's a cost. Because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. It doesn't sell, it doesn't trend, it doesn't dominate the room. So the voice of expertise often gets drowned out. Not by facts, but by confidence. We mistake volume for validity. We reward clarity over depth. And we follow those who sound sure, even when they're standing on air. This syndrome doesn't just affect others. It lives in you. It lives in all of us. Think of a time you gave advice too quickly. Maybe a friend asked about a problem, relationships, work, health, and you jumped in with certainty. You spoke from intuition, from your own narrow experience, and it felt right. But later you realized, I barely knew their full story. I didn't understand the layers, but by then, the damage may have been done. Overconfidence is seductive. It makes you feel powerful, insightful, respected. It's easy to confuse feeling sure with being right, but they're not the same. Confidence without foundation is a house of glass. It may shine in the sun, but the first true pressure shatters it. And yet, society rewards overconfidence. In interviews, in politics, in debates, we're drawn to those who appear certain, not cautious, not reflective. We want answers, not questions. We want simplicity, not complexity. And so, the loudest, most confident voices rise, not always because they're right, but because they appear unshaken. Even more tragically, people who are skilled, who've studied, learned, tested themselves, often feel like imposters. This is imposter syndrome, the expert's curse. The better you understand a system, the more aware you become of your own blind spots. You question yourself because you've seen how little anyone really controls. And that humility, while honest, often keeps real wisdom silent. The overconfidence syndrome isn't just a personal illusion. It's a social danger. It's how misinformation spreads, how bad leaders rise, how preventable mistakes are made, by people who didn't realize they were unqualified, but believed they were. They weren't lying. They were overconfident. So, how do we break the cycle? First, learn to fear certainty. Not all certainty, some things are known, but the kind that arrives too fast, too smooth, too complete, that's a red flag. Ask yourself, how do I know this? What evidence have I actually seen? What have I left out? The more you question your own conclusions, the more likely you are to find something real beneath them. Second, practice the pause. When someone speaks with bold simplicity about a complex issue, don't rush to agree. Ask for depth. Ask for sources. Ask, what would make you change your mind? If they have no answer, they're not offering truth. They're offering ego. And finally, respect doubt. Not as weakness, but as a sign of strength. It takes courage to say, I don't know. It takes real maturity to say, that's complicated. Those words don't close doors, they open them. In the end, knowledge is not a destination, it's a deepening spiral. And the more you know, the less you pretend to understand it all. So the next time you hear someone speak with absolute certainty, pause, wonder. Are they revealing truth, or just revealing how little they've seen? And when you catch yourself feeling confident, too confident, ask if that feeling is earned. Because behind every quiet expert is a mountain of doubt, and behind every loud fool is a cliff that they don't even know they're standing on. The Hindsight Fabrication. You look back and say, I knew it. You remember warning yourself. You recall the signs, the gut feeling, the hesitation. You tell yourself you saw it coming, but the truth is, you didn't. You only think you did because the outcome has already arrived, and your brain, without your permission, rewrote the past to match it. This is the hindsight fabrication, a quiet mental trick where your mind edits memory, reshapes belief, and inserts false foresight into your personal history. The illusion isn't just convincing, it feels real. You don't remember revising anything. The lie slides in unnoticed, and your past self, the one who doubted, hesitated, or guessed wrong, is erased, replaced by a version who always knew. You get dumped, and suddenly every red flag stands out in high definition. You fail an exam, and remember how unsure you were before it even began. A startup collapses, and investors say they saw the flaws early on. But in truth, before it happened, you didn't know. You hoped, you guessed, you wondered. But certainty came only afterward, and your memory was altered to make that certainty retroactive. Why does this happen? Because the human brain craves coherence. It wants the world to make sense. So, when events unfold, your mind rearranges past thoughts to make the present feel inevitable, like a movie that rewrites earlier scenes to fit the twist ending. But this isn't fiction. It's your internal narrative, silently updated without consent. In one study, people were told about an unfamiliar historical event, then asked to predict which outcome they thought was most likely. Afterward, they were told what actually happened. Later, when asked to recall what they had originally predicted, they overwhelmingly claimed to have guessed the correct answer. Not because they lied, but because they genuinely believed they'd known it all along. This illusion changes more than memory. It warps your sense of judgment. When you look back and believe the outcome was obvious, you grow unfairly critical of yourself, or others, for not acting sooner. You punish past mistakes that were never predictable. You scold decisions made under uncertainty as if they were clear errors. But nothing is clear in the moment. Life is a fog of choices, fears, and partial information. Only in hindsight do the pieces appear to fit, because your brain draws a line between them that wasn't there before. It's not a lie, it's a construction. A scaffolding built around the outcome, making it look solid and inevitable. Think of financial crashes. After every major collapse, pundits appear to claim they saw it coming. It was obvious, they say. All the signals were there. But if you rewind to before the crash, those same voices were often silent, or even optimistic. The signals only seem clear after the crash because the mind can't resist stitching cause to effect. Even in your personal life, hindsight turns unknowns into false certainties. You think, I knew they'd betray me. I knew that job was wrong. I knew the plan wouldn't work. But those thoughts often didn't exist at the time. They were planted later, memories edited to justify the present. And this illusion protects your ego too. If something went right, you remember being confident. You claim to have trusted your instincts, when in fact you may have been riddled with doubt. Success is framed as foresight, and failure, that gets pinned to someone else's blindness. Either way, the narrative is rewritten to make you look consistent, competent, in control. But consistency is a myth. Your past self was a different person, made of different hopes, fears, and available information. When you forget that, you lose compassion. You become harsh. You say, "I should have known better," when in truth, you couldn't have. To escape the hindsight fabrication, you must fight the pull of false clarity. You must remember how uncertain the moment really felt. Ask yourself, what did I actually believe before the outcome arrived? What doubts did I silence? What possibilities did I ignore? Not because I was foolish, but because I was human. Start journaling decisions, not outcomes. Just your thoughts before the result is known. Weeks later, revisit them. You'll see how much uncertainty you carried, how many possibilities were open, how unsure your predictions really were. And in that contrast, you'll witness the illusion exposed. Your memory isn't a recording. It's a story being rewritten in real time. Knowing this doesn't make you weak. It makes you wiser. Because the truth is, none of us really knew it all along. We just wish we did. The empathy imbalance. You see one person suffer, a child lost in a crowd, a stranger crying on a park bench, a face lit by pain on a hospital bed, and your chest tightens. You feel it instantly, viscerally. The urge to help, to reach out, to hold, that's empathy, and it's powerful. But now zoom out. One child becomes 1,000. One crying stranger becomes a nation, a statistic, a number scrolling past on a screen, and suddenly, nothing. The urgency fades, the feeling dulls. You keep scrolling, keep walking. Not because you don't care, but because your mind can't carry that weight. This is the empathy imbalance. It's not that you're heartless, it's that your empathy is biased, wired for the immediate, the visible, the singular. You are biologically tuned to care deeply about one suffering person, and to feel almost nothing for 1,000. It's not a moral failure, it's a neurological one. Your compassion collapses under scale, and that collapse shapes everything, from the charities you support to the wars you ignore. Psychologists call this scope insensitivity. A single story moves us, a number numbs us. It's why people will donate more money to save one identifiable child than to save an entire village. It's why media headlines show faces, not spreadsheets. Because the moment suffering becomes abstract, empathy shuts down. We aren't logical machines calculating the greatest good. We're story-driven creatures whose morality is triggered by faces, not figures. Take a famous example. A young girl named Rokia in Mali was featured in a charity campaign. When people saw her picture, donations surged. But when the same campaign included statistics about thousands like her, donations dropped. Why? Because the mind sees one child and says, "I can help." It sees thousands and says, "I can't make a difference." The problem becomes too big, too distant, so it feels safer to look away. This isn't limited to charity. It infects politics, health, climate action, everything. One celebrity gets a rare illness, and suddenly everyone wants a cure. But thousands dying quietly? That doesn't trend. A viral video of a single police act sparks protests, while systemic oppression stays invisible for decades. One war-torn child on the news breaks our heart. But 10 million displaced in a region we can't pronounce? It barely registers. Your empathy is not fair, it's not distributed, it's not rational, and it gets worse. In many cases, increasing the number of victims decreases the empathy felt. This is called the collapse of compassion. When people are told about one person in need, they give generously. But when told about many, they give less. Emotionally, we shut down. We ration our compassion, not because we're evil, but because we're overwhelmed. Your brain wasn't built for scale. In the ancestral world, you lived in groups of 100 or fewer. You knew everyone. Empathy evolved in that context, to protect kin, to bond with tribe, to detect distress in a single voice across the fire. But now, in a hyper-connected world, your moral senses are forced to process suffering from every corner of the globe. And they fail. Not from lack of caring, but from cognitive overload. So what do? How do we operate in a world where compassion doesn't scale, but suffering does? First, we have to admit it. Stop pretending we're perfectly rational moral agents. We're not. We care unequally. That doesn't make us monsters. It makes us human. But if we ignore that truth, we'll keep making decisions that feel good, while doing very little. Second, we must design around our flaws. Smart systems can help. Give directly doesn't show you a crying face. It shows you the impact. Effective altruism doesn't appeal to your feelings. It appeals to logic, asking you to give where your money goes furthest, not where the story is most dramatic. This feels cold, but it saves more lives. We need both, the heart that breaks and the brain that calculates. Third, we have to resist emotional manipulation. Media and politicians know how to weaponize your empathy. They show you one victim to distract you from thousands. They play on your outrage with cherry-picked stories while ignoring deeper structural harm. If you let them guide your empathy, they will trap it in spectacles and keep it away from solutions. Fourth, we must train ourselves to think at scale. It won't come naturally, but we can build it like a muscle. Learn to hold two truths. The suffering of one is sacred, but the suffering of many is urgent. Refuse to look away from numbers. Learn the stories behind the statistics. Don't choose between the face and the crowd. Feel both. That's moral maturity. But maybe the hardest truth is this. Empathy alone is not enough. It's too fragile, too biased, too easily broken. What we need is something colder and deeper. We need compassion guided by principle. Not just what feels urgent, but what is urgent. Not just who we can see, but who we cannot. Not just what breaks our heart, but what breaks the world. So the next time you feel moved by one person's pain, honor it. Help them. Let that empathy flow, but then ask, who am I not seeing? Whose suffering is hidden behind silence, distance, or data? Who needs me, but will never appear in a viral video? Because morality isn't measured by the intensity of what we feel for one. It's measured by how we act for the many. And maybe that's the ultimate challenge, to learn to love beyond our line of sight, to build a bridge from the trembling heart to the invisible crowd. The pattern hunger glitch. A shadow flickers in the corner of your eye. A series of numbers repeats. 1111, 333, 7, 77. A stranger says something that eerily matches a thought you just had. You pause. Goosebumps rise. Something whispers. This means something. But what if it doesn't? What if your brain is simply doing what it's always done, desperately searching for structure in the void, for signals in the static, for comfort in chaos? This is the pattern hunger glitch, a deep invisible impulse in the human mind to find meaning where there is none, to see order in randomness, to draw lines between stars that were never meant to be connected. It's not foolishness, it's instinct. From the moment we were born, we were wired to survive by prediction. What sound means danger? What movement means prey? What ritual makes the rain fall again? In a brutal, uncertain world, those who found patterns, real or imagined, stayed alive longer. But in the modern world, this adaptive strength has become a glitch. We see faces in clouds. We hear messages in white noise. We draw connections between dreams and events, songs and emotions, signs and fate. Because to the human mind, randomness feels like a threat. And so, we overwrite it with narrative. You've likely felt it. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in months, and they call. You tell yourself, it's a sign. But it might be nothing more than probability. You just don't remember the hundreds of times you thought of someone, and they didn't call. The brain doesn't archive silence. It highlights coincidence. It rewards you with a dopamine hit for spotting patterns, even if they are imaginary, because recognizing a connection feels powerful. Feels like you're in sync with something larger than yourself. But the truth is colder. The universe isn't aligning for you. Your perception is aligning itself. This is the glitch, not in the world, but in our processing of it. You look at static on a screen. Your brain sees a face. The pixels don't lie, but your perception does. It tries to make sense of what doesn't make sense. This process is called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data. It's related to pareidolia, where you see shapes or hear voices that aren't actually there. It's the same mechanism that made ancient people see gods in storms, omens in bird patterns, and curses in comets. To our ancestors, randomness wasn't acceptable. Everything had to mean something. Otherwise, what was the point? Even now, we do the same. A lucky shirt, a cursed date, a song that always plays when you feel lost. None of these things are connected, but you feel they are. And that feeling grows stronger the more uncertain life becomes. The more chaotic your reality, the hungrier your mind becomes for patterns. Because in those patterns is the illusion of control. If you can predict, you can prepare. If you can understand, you can protect. But in our desperation to feel safe, we start to believe in ghosts that don't exist. Consider conspiracy theories. Most are built not on facts, but on this glitch. Random, disconnected events are woven together into a coherent but false narrative. Why? Because chaos is unbearable. It's more comforting to believe that a secret group controls everything than to accept that no one does. It's easier to believe a pattern is being hidden from you than to face the truth that there is no pattern at all. This is the emotional core of pattern hunger, the fear of meaninglessness. If nothing connects, then nothing matters. And we are alone in the noise. But the glitch doesn't stop at superstition. It affects science, memory, relationships. You remember coincidences more vividly than ordinary events. You connect a smell to a memory and suddenly believe the two are tied. You attribute someone's success to a ritual you once performed, and you do it again. It becomes a mental superstition, reinforced by your own selective memory. The glitch feeds itself. The more often you spot patterns, the more convinced you become that they are everywhere. And slowly, reality bends to your belief. Not because it changes, but because your attention does. This is how gamblers fall into traps. The roulette wheel hits black 5 times. You think red must be next. But it doesn't work like that. Each spin is independent. The past doesn't predict the future. But the brain whispers, there's a pattern. And you trust it. You bet. You lose. And you still trust it. Because the pattern hunger glitch isn't logical. It's emotional. It's primal. It whispers in your sleep and paints your memories. It's the part of your mind that would rather believe a lie with structure than a truth without meaning. Even love isn't immune. You meet someone who shares your birthday, who grew up in the same city, who says something you've always believed. You tell yourself, this is fate. But maybe it's just chance. Maybe they're not your twin flame. Maybe they're just another person who happened to stand where your story needed a miracle. But your mind is desperate to stitch meaning from the cloth of coincidence. It's comforting. It's poetic. But is it true? So, how do we protect ourselves from this glitch? First, by acknowledging that our brains are pattern machines, and that this function, while useful, is not infallible. You can notice the pattern without bowing to it. You can say, that's interesting, instead of, that's fate. Second, by cultivating statistical humility. Understand how probability works. Remind yourself that rare events don't need reasons, that sometimes things just happen. And that's okay. Third, question the rush to assign meaning. Ask, do I believe this because it's true or because it comforts me? The answer might sting, but that sting is the price of clarity. Finally, resist the temptation to feel chosen. When something aligns perfectly, when life seems to send a signal, pause. Look deeper. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not. But remember, the mind that craves patterns will find them even when they don't exist. The pattern hunger glitch is not a weakness, it's a survival mechanism. But survival isn't the same as truth. And if you want to live awake, if you want to see the world as it is, not just as it feels, then you must learn to stand still in the storm of randomness without reaching for a pattern to hold. Because sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is accept the chaos and walk forward anyway. The action illusion loop, you feel it rising, that pressure in your chest, that twitch in your fingers, that ache to do something, anything. Because stillness feels like failure, waiting feels like weakness, so you move, you respond, you fix, you act. But not every action is progress, and not every stillness is stagnation. Sometimes doing something, anything, is not courage, it's escape. You're not running toward clarity, you're running from discomfort. And in doing so, you fall into the action illusion loop. It's the trap of equating movement with meaning, of believing that any response, any decision, any output must be better than nothing. You refresh your inbox, you reorganize your desk, you send a message, you pick a path. And for a moment, it feels better. Not because it was right, but because the pressure is gone. But relief isn't resolution, and motion isn't direction. The brain craves closure. When faced with uncertainty, it floods your system with tension. Ambiguity is uncomfortable, like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure which way is safe. So your mind pushes you to jump, to pick something, to do. And when you do, it rewards you. A small hit of dopamine, the illusion of control, the temporary feeling that you've solved something. But did you? Or did you just interrupt the discomfort before it could teach you something deeper? Real growth, real clarity, often begins in the pause, in the exhale between impulses, in the empty space where you resist the need to act and instead observe, reflect, allow. But the modern world doesn't teach us to wait. It teaches us to respond, to optimize, to chase efficiency. You're told to hustle, to grind, to stay moving or be left behind. Don't just sit there, do something. But sometimes, the truth is, don't just do something, sit there. Because not all action is aligned. Not all forward motion is toward the right direction. If you don't know where you're going, speed becomes a liability. You end up 10 miles down the wrong road, proud that you're not still at the starting line, but lost all the same. This illusion is everywhere. You feel lonely, so you text someone you don't truly connect with. You feel uncertain at work, so you take on a task just to stay busy. You feel disconnected from yourself, so you book a trip, rearrange your schedule, start a new project, anything to avoid the ache of stillness. And it works, briefly. But beneath the surface, the root remains, unexamined, untouched, waiting. Because the discomfort wasn't the enemy, it was the signal, the invitation to slow down, to listen, to get still enough to hear what your compulsions were drowning out. But you acted too fast. Again, it's not your fault. We've been conditioned to confuse reaction with responsibility, to associate waiting with weakness, to fear the void. But silence is not nothing. Stillness is not failure. The space between impulse and action is where wisdom lives. Think of all the moments you wish you had waited, said less, sent nothing, let the feeling pass, made space for a clearer view. How many times did you act out of urgency, only to look back and realize the urgency wasn't real, just fear in disguise? Because fear wants resolution, it wants answers, it wants to know. And if it can't know, it will settle for doing, even if that doing is destructive. So, what can you do? You can practice the pause. You can learn to sit in the ache of uncertainty. You can train your nervous system not to flinch at silence. You can ask, before every action, is this coming from alignment or from anxiety, from clarity or from compulsion? And then, only then, do you move. Because when you act from stillness, your steps are rooted. When you act from silence, your voice carries truth. When you wait for the noise to settle, the path often reveals itself. Action is not the enemy, but unexamined action is. And if you don't slow down, the loop continues. You act. You feel relief. You believe it worked. You repeat. But the deeper problem remains untouched, and the cost compounds over time. Don't let the illusion steal your direction. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not out of apathy, but out of respect for the decision. You are not lazy for waiting. You are not weak for pausing. You are wise enough to know that stillness is not a lack of momentum. It's the gathering of it. You don't need to act just because you're uncomfortable. Let the discomfort burn clean. Let it strip away your compulsions. Let it teach you. And when the time comes, you'll act. Not to escape, but to arrive. The certainty addiction. You're scrolling through your feed, and you see a post that says exactly what you already believe. It's simple. It's sharp. It makes you feel seen. No nuance, no ambiguity, just a clean, perfect headline that seems to explain everything. You click like, you share it, and you move on. But here's the catch. It wasn't true. Not fully, maybe not even at all, but it felt true, and that was enough. Your brain rewarded you not for accuracy, but for certainty. This is the certainty addiction, a mental craving not for truth, but for clarity, for confidence, for answers that feel finished, even if they're wrong. It's a deep neurological bias. When faced with complexity, the brain would rather grasp at a lie that sounds surer than wrestle with a truth that feels uncertain. You've done it. We all have. Faced with a confusing problem, you might pick the explanation that's easy to digest, rather than the one that's actually supported by data. You might trust the person who speaks louder, not the one who hesitates. You might ignore doubt because doubt is uncomfortable. Doubt is slow. Doubt leaves you hanging. And your brain doesn't like to hang. It wants closure. From an evolutionary standpoint, this made sense. In life or death situations, hesitation could kill. Our ancestors had to act fast, decide fast, believe fast. Certainty gave them survival. But in today's world, that instinct backfires, because now the danger is not indecision. It's oversimplification. It's choosing the fast answer over the right one, and calling it wisdom. Your mind is wired to favor patterns. It wants things to make sense, to be neat. So, when something doesn't fit, it bends the facts, or ignores them. This is why conspiracy theories survive, not because they're logical, but because they offer certainty. They turn chaos into order. They say, here's what's really going on. And the relief that follows, that hit of mental clarity, is addictive. Even when it's false, certainty is emotionally soothing. It's easier to say, all politicians are corrupt, than to dig into complex policy. It's easier to say, they're just evil, than to understand history, trauma, and systems. And it's much easier to believe this is 100% true than to ask, what am I missing? The problem is, reality doesn't care what makes you feel safe. Reality is messy. It contradicts itself. It shifts, evolves, hides pieces from you. And if you're addicted to certainty, you'll reject that reality again and again, choosing instead a comforting fiction. You'll stop learning. You'll stop listening. You'll stop questioning. Because in your mind, the story is already written, and every new fact becomes a threat. Have you ever tried to explain something nuanced to someone who just wants a yes or no? You start to explain, but their eyes glaze over. They say, just tell me what to think. Not out of laziness, but out of need. Certainty gives them identity. Doubt threatens that identity. So when you offer them a complex truth, they reject it. Not because they disagree, but because they can't tolerate the ambiguity. Certainty is intoxicating. And withdrawal from it feels like anxiety. This is why some people cling to beliefs even when the evidence collapses. The belief gave them order. It helped them feel strong. And now, the truth asks them to live in chaos. Most would rather be wrong with confidence than right with doubt. They'd rather say, I know, than I wonder. And that choice can last a lifetime. Even science isn't immune. The scientific method is built on doubt, on testing and falsification. But scientists, too, are human. They get attached to theories. They ignore outliers. They cherry-pick data. Not because they're evil, because they crave certainty like everyone else. In politics, this addiction turns dangerous. The more uncertain the world becomes, economically, environmentally, socially, the more people cling to leaders who promise simple answers. They're the enemy. We are the good guys. This is the only solution. These messages feel powerful, but they were not signs of wisdom. They're symptoms of addiction. So, how do you break it? The first step is brutal honesty. Admit to yourself, I like being sure. I like the feeling of knowing. There's nothing shameful about that. It's human. But once you see it, you can start asking better questions. You can train your brain to pause at the edge of certainty, to ask, what would it take to prove me wrong? To ask, is there a piece of this I don't understand yet? To ask, am I clinging to this idea because it's right or because it's familiar? It's not weakness to live in uncertainty. It's strength. Because the person who can hold conflicting ideas without collapsing, the person who can say, I don't know, but I'm trying to learn, is the one who walks toward truth, not away from it. Real clarity doesn't come from rejecting complexity. It comes from stepping into it, over and over, until you can navigate its shadows without needing to flatten them. So, the next time you feel that rush of confidence, that tight grip of, I'm sure, pause. Feel it for what it is, a craving. Then ask yourself if you're feeding that craving, or feeding your understanding. Because in the long run, certainty fades, but curiosity builds, and the truth lives where your comfort ends. The logic misuse effect. You believe you're being logical. You believe you're weighing evidence, breaking down arguments, thinking clearly. But in truth, more often than not, your logic is a servant, not of truth, but of emotion. This is the logic misuse effect, where reasoning is not used to discover what's right, but to defend what already feels right. It's subtle, it's elegant, and it's devastating. You make a decision, you form a belief. You feel a certain way about a topic, a person, or an idea, and then, only after the feeling has taken root, you begin to gather reasons. You search for facts, but not with an open hand. You search with a sword. Every fact you find becomes a weapon, not to challenge yourself, but to protect yourself. You aren't using logic as a microscope to examine your belief. You're using it as a shield, or worse, as a hammer. This isn't a flaw in your intelligence. It's a feature of human cognition. The smarter you are, the better you are at building justifications. Intelligence doesn't immunize you from bias. It often supercharges it. You cherry-pick statistics, reinterpret data, and reframe evidence, not to seek clarity, but to maintain consistency. Because deep down, consistency feels safer than truth. You watch a debate and notice how often people twist logic to fit their position. But what's harder to notice is when you do it. You believe your stance on politics, religion, or identity is rational. But if someone shows you contrary evidence, your brain doesn't slow down to reflect. It speeds up to reject. It gets defensive. It interrogates the opposing data, but barely touches your own. That's not logic. That's confirmation bias in a tuxedo. In a famous experiment, participants were shown two studies, one that supported their views and one that contradicted them. Both studies had the same design, same structure, same level of rigor, but participants rated the study that agreed with them as scientifically sound and dismissed the other as flawed. When logic was needed most, emotion sat in the judge's seat. You don't reason to find the truth. You reason to avoid discomfort. This illusion is dangerous because it feels like truth-seeking. It wears the mask of rationality. You build arguments, cite sources, connect dots, and in the process, convince yourself that you're being fair. But you're not searching. You're defending. Think about the last time you changed your mind about something important. Not just updated a detail, but truly shifted your worldview. How long ago was it? How did it feel? Rare, right? That's because real logic challenges you. It humbles you. And most people would rather be certain than shaken. Emotion drives the car. Logic is the lawyer in the passenger seat, justifying every turn after it's already been made. You see it everywhere. In online debates where people aren't trying to understand, they're trying to win. In family arguments where facts become weapons. In how you defend your past choices. Not because they were best, but because they were yours. Logic becomes a loyal dog. It doesn't bark at the flaws in your thinking. It barks at anyone who questions your story. And the worst part? You don't notice. You genuinely believe you're being reasonable, because your brain is a master illusionist. It hides your motives, edits your memories, smooths over contradictions, and convinces you that your conclusions were rational all along. So, what can you do? Start by doubting your own logic, not with self-hatred, but with curiosity. Ask yourself, am I using this argument to discover or to defend? When you find evidence, ask, would I believe this if it pointed the other way? When you spot a flaw in someone else's logic, ask, have I looked for flaws in mine? It's not about becoming perfectly objective. That's impossible. It's about becoming honest with yourself, about noticing when logic starts to feel like a weapon and pausing before you swing it. True logic humbles you. It makes you revise. It makes you admit what you don't know. If your reasoning only ever confirms what you already believe, then you're not thinking. You're rationalizing. And that's the great trap. You mistake sharpness for clarity, but the sharpest blade can still be aimed in the wrong direction. And sometimes, the only thing it cuts is the truth. So be careful, not of others, of yourself. Because the most dangerous lies are the ones you tell with evidence, and the most convincing arguments are the ones you build after you've already decided what's right. The availability distortion. You hear about a plane crash. It dominates the news cycle. Footage of wreckage, grieving families, expert panels. You don't know anyone on that flight, but you feel shaken. So next time you book a ticket, a quiet fear creeps in. You hesitate. You imagine worst-case scenarios. But here's the truth. Flying is still the safest form of travel. What changed wasn't reality. It was what your mind made available. This is the availability distortion. It's a bias so subtle, so automatic, that most people never notice it. Your brain assumes that if something is easy to recall, it must be common. If a danger is vivid, it must be likely. If a story is recent, it must be representative. And that's where the distortion begins. Not in reality, but in memory. You don't judge the world by facts. You judge it by what you remember best. And what you remember best is almost never what happens most. The availability distortion warps your sense of risk, truth, and frequency. You think shark attacks are a real threat because they're dramatic and rare, not because they happen often. You fear terrorism more than heart disease, though one kills exponentially more people. You overestimate crime after watching the news, and underestimate kindness because it doesn't trend. Your entire worldview tilts toward the dramatic, not because you're irrational, but because you're human. Memory isn't a perfect archive, it's a spotlight, and the beam swings toward the recent, the emotional, the sensational. Anything that shocks or sticks, those are the stories your brain files near the top. And when you're asked to judge what's normal, you reach for what's on top. That's the distortion. You confuse accessibility with accuracy. Marketing, politics, and media thrive on this bias. The more vivid the story, the more likely you are to remember it and act on it. Politicians use single, shocking anecdotes to justify sweeping policies. News outlets bombard you with rare horrors that seem constant. Brands exploit viral events to create urgency, fear, or desire. Not because they're showing you the full picture, but because they know what your brain responds to. Think about this. If you watch 5 stories in a row about violent crime, your brain starts constructing a world where that's the norm, even if crime rates are actually dropping. You're not imagining things, you're just remembering the wrong things, and your decisions start reflecting that distorted memory. You avoid people. You vote for fear-based solutions. You mistrust places and groups, not because of what you've experienced, but because of what you've absorbed. It doesn't just affect your perception of danger, it affects how you judge people. Imagine someone from a culture you don't know commits a crime that goes viral. Your brain, desperate for patterns, ties that vivid image to the entire group. You start seeing a distorted version of reality, where one person's story overshadows the quiet truth of millions. This is how prejudice is born, not from facts, but from recall. Even in your personal life, the distortion shows up. One argument with a friend can feel like the whole relationship is sour, even if years of warmth came before it. One failure at work can make you feel incompetent, even if your overall track record says otherwise, because your brain magnifies the moment it can see most clearly. And clarity doesn't equal truth, it only equals recall. So how do you fight this? First, become suspicious of what feels obvious. If a thought jumps to mind too quickly, ask yourself, is this true or just easy to remember? Did I really experience this pattern or did I see it on a screen? Second, ask for base rates. What's actually common? Look at data, not drama. If you feel afraid of something, learn how often it really happens. You'll often find that the danger lives more in headlines than in real life. Third, diversify your inputs. Don't let algorithms or media narrow your view of the world. If all you see is tragedy, outrage, and conflict, you'll believe that's the whole story. But it's not. Most of the world operates in quiet decency. Most people are neither heroes nor villains. They're ordinary, kind, flawed. And ordinary doesn't go viral. Fourth, pause before judgment. Before you form a belief, ask yourself what memory it's built on. Is that memory recent, vivid, emotional? If so, it might be coloring your logic. Wait. Zoom out. Balance that moment with the moments you forgot. Because the truth is, your brain isn't built for statistical reasoning. It's built for stories. And those stories don't represent the world. They just represent the spotlight your mind happened to shine. The problem is when you start mistaking the spotlight for the stage. Even experts aren't immune. Doctors overestimate the likelihood of rare conditions they've seen recently. Judges give harsher sentences after hearing about a shocking case. Investors panic over market crashes because recent downturns loom larger than historical gains. This isn't stupidity. It's availability. But if you recognize it, if you name it, you can catch the distortion before it warps your decisions. Don't believe everything you remember. Don't trust every fear that comes quickly. Question the loudest thoughts. They might just be echoes of something dramatic, not something true. The world is not made of what you remember most. It's made of what actually is. And clarity begins when you learn to see the difference. The sunk emotion trap. You loved them once, maybe still do. Even though they keep breaking you in ways that words can't explain, you stay. Not because it's good, not because it's working, but because walking away would mean everything you gave, your hope, your loyalty, your late-night forgiveness, meant nothing. And that thought is unbearable. This is the sunk emotion trap, a quiet prison we build around ourselves using love, time, and pain as the bricks. It's the trap that whispers, if I leave now, everything I felt will have been for nothing. So you stay, not because it's right, but because quitting feels like betrayal, not of them, but of your own heart. It starts with investment. Not money, though the concept mirrors the economic sunk cost fallacy. This is about emotional investment. Time spent loving someone who didn't love you back the way you needed. Years spent chasing a dream that no longer fits your soul. Energy poured into a friendship, a marriage, a belief system, a version of yourself that no longer serves you. You think, I've come this far. I've given too much. I can't just walk away now. But here's the brutal truth. What you've already given is gone. You don't get it back. The only question that matters is, what will staying cost you next? But your heart doesn't think in logic. It thinks in memories, in promises, in what-ifs. You remember the laughter, the early sparks, the reasons you chose this in the first place. You convince yourself that maybe, just maybe, it'll go back to how it used to be. But that's rarely true, because the very act of staying for too long often turns love into debt. Every new moment isn't free. It's charged with the weight of all the others you already spent. This trap doesn't just happen in relationships. It happens in careers. You spend years studying a field you now dread. You land the job, wear the title, earn the paycheck, and yet every morning feels like morning. You tell yourself, I can't throw it all away. I worked too hard. But is clinging to misery a reward for hard work? Or a punishment for your fear of change? It happens with identity. You built yourself around a belief, a worldview, a community, a philosophy. But now, cracks are showing. Doubts are forming. You don't feel aligned, but you push them down. Because leaving means admitting that you were once wrong, that the person you used to be no longer fits inside the person you are. And that grief feels like erasing yourself. So you stay, and pretend, and shrink. The sunk emotion trap thrives on guilt. It tells you that letting go is giving up, that moving on is weakness, that changing your mind is betrayal. But none of that is true. Walking away is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of self-respect. Sometimes the most courageous act isn't to hold on tighter, but to admit that your heart deserves better than the place it's currently trapped in. But why is it so hard? Because the trap isn't just emotional, it's existential. If you leave the thing you gave your heart to, what does that say about you? Were you naive? Were you blind? Were you foolish? The answer is, you were human. You believed. You hoped. You tried. And that was never a mistake. The mistake is punishing yourself for it. Psychologically, this is a mix of cognitive dissonance and identity inertia. You're trying to hold two contradictory truths. I chose this, and this hurts me. The mind doesn't like contradiction, so it bends reality to reduce the tension. You tell yourself the pain is temporary, that you're being dramatic, that you just need to be more patient, more forgiving, more loyal. But sometimes, no amount of loyalty will fix what's already broken. Sometimes, the act of staying is what's causing the bleeding. Think of it like this. If you found yourself in a burning house, would you stay inside just because you spent years decorating the rooms? No. You would run. Because no amount of past effort justifies being burned alive. And yet emotionally, we do the opposite. We stay in the fire, clutching memories, trying to repaint the walls while the flames consume us. Because to leave feels like letting go of who we used to be. But staying means abandoning who we could become. You've likely seen it in others. The friend in a toxic relationship who says, but we've been through so much. The parent who won't change careers because I've worked here for 20 years. The dreamer who keeps chasing a goal they no longer believe in because I can't give up now. But what's harder to admit is this. You've been that person too. We all have. We've all stayed too long in places that drained us. Not because we didn't know, but because we couldn't bear to face the emotional cost of admitting the past was already spent. But here's the shift. Leaving doesn't erase what you felt. It honors it. Walking away doesn't mean it was all for nothing. It means it mattered enough for you to grow, to learn, to make a new choice. The heart is not a ledger. You don't owe it to anyone, not even yourself, to suffer just to prove the past had value. What matters now is the future. What matters now is the life you still have left to live, the peace, the clarity, the love you still deserve. And staying in pain for the sake of past comfort is not loyalty. It's self-abandonment. The sunk emotion trap is silent. It doesn't scream. It sighs. It tells you to wait a little longer, to hold on just a bit more, to keep hoping until your hope becomes a cage. And one day, you look around and realize the walls were made from your own refusal to let go. But it's never too late. You can still leave the burning house. You can still choose the unknown over the unbearable. You can still say, I gave everything I had, and now I choose something that gives back. That is not quitting. That is healing. That is power. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop fighting for something that already left you behind. The clean slate delusion. You tell yourself this time will be different. New job, new city, new relationship, new habits, a clean slate. A fresh start, like wiping the chalkboard of your life and beginning again, with no residue, no baggage. But the slate was never clean. Not really. And deep down, some part of you knows that. Because the past doesn't vanish just because you change the scenery. You carry it. Quietly. Invisibly. Like ink soaked deep into your skin. Your patterns follow you. Your fears echo inside new rooms. Your wounds speak in the tone of your voice when you say, I'm fine. This is the clean slate delusion, the comforting lie that a new beginning erases what came before, that a change in context is a change in character, that geography can untangle what psychology has tied in knots. But it can't, because your brain is not made of pages, it's made of paths, and every decision you've made, every belief you've absorbed, every wound you've suffered, carved a trail into you. The more you walked it, the deeper it got. And when you try to start fresh, those paths are still there, waiting. You leave the relationship, but you take your attachment patterns with you, your fear of abandonment, your need to perform, your silence when you're hurt, all of it. You carry it like luggage packed in muscle memory. You quit the job, but your fear of failure, your need to prove yourself, your inability to rest, still follows you into the next office, the next meeting, the next inbox. You move to a new place hoping the air will feel different, but the same thoughts echo in your mind. The same late-night regrets, the same anxiety and new furniture, because fresh starts aren't real if the person starting isn't different. And change doesn't come from swapping external details, it comes from confronting internal truths, but that's harder, slower, messier. So we choose the shortcut. We tell ourselves a new beginning will do the work for us, and for a little while, it feels like it does. The novelty quiets the old patterns, the distraction blurs the pain. The excitement mimics progress, but then it returns. Not because you failed, but because you never really started over. You just changed the backdrop. It's like painting over a cracked wall. It looks smooth, clean, new, but the fractures are still beneath. Given time, they rise again, and you wonder why your fresh start didn't fix you. The truth is, nothing outside can heal what hasn't been faced inside. You can move to a mountaintop, fall in love again, delete every photo, change your name, change your job, change your body, and still be trapped in the same loops. Because the loops don't live in your surroundings. They live in your nervous system, in your conditioned responses, in the meanings you attach to silence, to conflict, to attention, to rejection. You cannot start over unless you go backward, unless you unpack the bags you've been dragging. That means noticing when a smile is really self-protection, when people-pleasing is a survival reflex, when ambition is a mask for worthlessness, when silence is not peace, but learned helplessness. It means grieving the you that never got to speak. It means sitting with shame instead of outrunning it. It means tracing your patterns to their roots and asking, when did I first feel this? Who taught me that I had to be this way to be safe? And then, only then, can you begin again. Not by erasing, but by integrating. Not by pretending the past is gone, but by finally letting it be seen, because there is no clean slate. But there is a real one. A slate where the lines of your past are still visible, but no longer defining. Where your history is acknowledged, not denied. where you stop trying to be brand new and instead become whole. This is the deeper start, the slower one, the one that hurts before it heals. It doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with quiet mornings of choosing differently, of catching yourself mid-pattern and pausing, of sitting in the silence where you used to panic, of doing nothing when you used to run. You won't look reborn. You'll look ordinary, but the shift will be seismic. So the next time you feel the urge to start over, to reset your life with a new place, new person, and new plan, ask yourself, what am I really trying to leave behind? And what will I bring with me without even realizing it? Because change is not escape, and healing is not relocation. You cannot outrun what lives inside you, but you can turn around, face it, name it, unlearn it, and then, step by step, carry yourself, not as someone brand new, but as someone finally seen. The slate was never clean, but that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human, and that is the most honest place to begin. The attention tunnel. You're staring at your screen, deep in a task, maybe reading an article, replying to a message, or analyzing a number. You're focused, sharp. Everything else fades. You don't hear the clock ticking, you don't see the sun changing angle. Someone calls your name, and you flinch, like waking from a dream. Because in that moment, nothing else existed. That's the attention tunnel. Your mind, when fixated, doesn't just ignore the outside world. It erases it. It shines a mental spotlight so intense on one object, one thought, one emotion, that everything beyond its glow drops into darkness. Not background noise, not low priority, but invisible. You didn't choose to miss it. You never even saw it was there. This isn't just distraction, it's perception collapse. The attention tunnel is your brain's way of allocating resources. When something feels urgent or rewarding or difficult, your neural circuits tighten. They filter out irrelevant data. They shut the windows. They close the doors. That's why you can lose hours in a task and be shocked by the time. It's why you don't notice pain when you're scared, or miss obvious cues when you're emotionally invested. It's how a magician fools you. It's how a driver crashes while texting. It's how you misjudge people, mishear words, misplace truths. You're not seeing the world. You're seeing what your brain lets in under a narrow beam of focus. And the danger? You feel clear, not limited. Imagine this. You're watching a video of two basketball teams passing balls. You're told to count how many times the players in white pass the ball. You focus hard, counting carefully. And then someone asks, "Did you see the gorilla?" You didn't. But the gorilla was there, full costume. Walked through the middle of the screen, looked at the camera. This isn't a metaphor. It's a real experiment, the invisible gorilla study. And over 50% of people miss it. Not because their eyes are closed, because their attention is. When your brain locks on, reality becomes a tunnel. And anything outside that tunnel doesn't feel like it's missing. It just isn't. This is called inattentional blindness. It's not a bug, it's a trade-off. Your mind can process only so much. So it bets everything on what it thinks matters. But what if it bets wrong? Imagine you're arguing with someone you love. You're so focused on defending your point, so certain you're right, that you miss the pain on their face. You don't hear the shaking in their voice. You don't notice that this isn't about facts anymore. It's about trust. But you're locked in the tunnel. You're not seeing a person. You're seeing a target. Or consider addiction. When someone is addicted, whether to substances, habits, validation, their attention narrows. The craving becomes the only thing in view. Risk, health, relationships, future consequences, these fade. The tunnel doesn't allow contrast. It doesn't allow alternatives. It whispers, this is all that matters. Nothing else exists. Even ambition can tunnel you. You're chasing a goal, grades, money, recognition, and suddenly you don't see your health deteriorating. You don't notice you're lonely. You don't realize you've stopped being kind. Because success became the spotlight. And everything else, even your own peace, was cast into shadow. The tunnel gives intensity, but it steals perspective. This happens in politics. You become focused on your side, your belief, your news source. You read what confirms, you share what agrees, you mock what challenges, and you stop noticing the full spectrum. The middle disappears, the nuance vanishes. You're staring into a narrow beam, thinking it's daylight. Even fear creates a tunnel. You walk into a dark room, hear a sound, and suddenly every fiber of you zeroes in on it. Your attention floods the unknown, amplifying every creak. In that moment, your brain can't process that the heater turned on or the wind shifted. You're inside the tunnel of threat, and all logic evaporates. Your mind is not built for omniscience. It's built for focus. And focus, while powerful, is also blinding. So, how do you widen the lens? First, notice when you feel certain. Certainty often signals a tunnel. Ask, what am I not seeing right now? What am I ignoring because it doesn't fit? Second, step back. Literally. Physically change your environment, change your posture, look around. Name 5 things in the room. Disrupt the trance, force your senses to recalibrate. Third, invite contradiction. When you're deep into a belief, a project, a feeling, ask someone outside it for their view. Listen without arguing. Don't defend. Just observe how much your tunnel left out. And most of all, respect the unknown. If something feels invisible, don't assume it doesn't exist. Assume you might be missing it, because you probably are. The attention tunnel isn't evil. It's how you write a novel, how you solve a problem, how you lose yourself in beauty. But unchecked, it becomes a prison made of light, so bright that you don't realize how many things live in the dark. So the next time you're deep in something, work, love, fear, rage, pause. Ask yourself, what's just outside my spotlight? You might find the thing you most needed was hiding just beyond your attention. The social comparison virus. You scroll, you watch, you double tap, and somewhere quietly, a voice inside you whispers, you're behind. Behind in success, behind in beauty, behind in life. You see someone's vacation and wonder why you're stuck at home. You see their smile and question your own sadness. Their promotion, their relationship, their confidence, it all glows through the screen, and you feel dimmer in comparison. This is the social comparison virus. It infects slowly. No symptoms at first. Just a subtle tightening in the chest, a quiet erosion of gratitude. Then, without realizing it, your self-worth begins to hinge on someone else's curated moment. You measure your value by images, captions, and glimpses, not of reality, but of performance. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how reflective, how grounded. Your brain is wired to compare. It's ancient. It's biological. For early humans, knowing where you stood in the tribe meant survival. But in the modern world, that instinct misfires. Now, your tribe is 7 billion strangers, and the only thing they show you is their best angle. No one posts their breakdown. No one live streams their loneliness. No one filters in the moment they failed quietly and cried in the dark. But those moments still exist in everyone's life. They just aren't broadcast. What you see is the highlight reel, the celebration, the vacation, the announcement, the polished success. And it's not that those moments are fake, they're real, but they are incomplete, and your mind forgets that. You compare your raw footage to their final cut, your messy process to their perfect snapshot, and in doing so, you forget something vital. Their glow hides as much pain as yours, just in better lighting. Someone posts about their marriage, and you assume it's flawless. You don't see the arguments, the therapy, the doubt. Someone shares their 6-figure job offer, and you feel small. But you don't see the sleepless nights, the imposter syndrome, the silent costs. A friend posts a joyful photo with friends, and you assume you're the only one who feels alone. But they may have posted it to hide their loneliness. Comparison doesn't need truth to hurt you. It only needs illusion. This virus doesn't just steal your joy, it infects your decisions. You start choosing paths not because they're right for you, but because they look impressive from the outside. You pursue goals for validation, not fulfillment. You begin to treat your life like it's being watched, and in the process, you forget how to simply be. You become the editor of your own existence, filtering not just your photos, but your personality. You perform happiness, you perform passion, you perform success. And the more you do, the harder it becomes to remember what was ever real. It doesn't end with strangers. Even among friends, you compare silently. Who has more? Who's doing better? Who's aging slower? Earning faster? Smiling wider? The virus turns connection into quiet competition. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. Everyone feels it. Everyone's scrolling. Everyone's comparing. Everyone is wondering if they're enough. And that's what makes this illusion so dangerous. You feel like you're the only one losing the game, not realizing that everyone else is just as infected. So, how do you fight back? You start by looking away. Not forever, but long enough to remember what your life actually feels like when it isn't being measured. Spend time in places that aren't made for performance. Write something no one will read. Dance when no one is watching. Ask yourself, not what looks good, but what feels honest. And more importantly, when you see someone else's joy, don't assume it came without pain. Don't envy the light until you understand the shadow it hides. Because the people you admire, the ones you think have it all together, are often the same ones wondering if they are falling apart. Your life is not a failure because it doesn't match someone else's story. Your journey is not meaningless because it doesn't fit a trend. The only timeline that matters is yours. The only measure is how it feels to live it, not how it looks from the outside. So, the next time you catch yourself thinking, they're ahead and I'm behind, remind yourself, you're not on the same road. You're not even running the same race. The finish line is not admiration, it's authenticity. And the cure for comparison is compassion, especially for yourself. The Misplaced Guilt Program. You replay the moment again and again. The words you didn't say, the gesture you didn't make, the timing you didn't control. Something went wrong. Maybe someone got hurt, something fell apart, or a life changed forever. And your mind whispers, maybe it's because of me. Maybe if I'd done more, said something, been there, it would have been different. That whisper grows louder. It becomes a loop, not of truth, but of guilt. This is the Misplaced Guilt Program. It's the silent software running in the background of your mind, installed early, updated often. And it convinces you that if something went wrong, you must carry the weight. Even if it wasn't your fault, even if it was never in your hands, you carry guilt, not because you caused the pain, but because you couldn't stop it. And that helplessness becomes shame disguised as responsibility. You feel guilty your parents fought, even though you were a child. You feel guilty a friend spiraled, even though you tried to help. You feel guilty someone got sick, left, changed, or died, even though it was out of your control. You feel guilty for surviving what others didn't, for being okay when someone else wasn't, for walking away when staying would have broken you. And none of this guilt belongs to you. But it feels real, heavy, unshakable. Why? Because your brain craves control, especially in chaos. When something painful happens, randomness feels unbearable. The idea that bad things just happen, without meaning, without fairness, terrifies us. So the mind does something twisted. It blames you, not because it hates you, but because it prefers blame over powerlessness. Guilt becomes a form of control. If I cause this, it says, then maybe I can prevent it next time. This is the illusion, the trap, and it runs deep. Childhood is where this program often begins. Kids are egocentric by nature, not selfish, but wired to believe they are the center of things. If a parent leaves, gets angry, gets sick, the child thinks, it must be because of me. Not because they're wrong, but because they're too young to see any wider frame. And if no one corrects this belief, it hardens. The child grows into an adult who blames themselves whenever things go wrong, even when there's no connection. They inherit burdens they never chose. Society reinforces it. We praise those who feel guilty for doing their best. We confuse guilt with virtue. We admire people who take responsibility for everything because it looks noble. But sometimes, it's just unhealed trauma in disguise. Guilt isn't always a sign of conscience. Sometimes, it's a sign of learned self-punishment. Let's be clear. There is healthy guilt. The kind that comes when you know you've harmed someone. The kind that drives accountability and change. But misplaced guilt is different. It lingers without cause. It demands apology where none is owed. It tells you to shrink, to ache, to carry. And here's the paradox. People who feel the most misplaced guilt are often the ones least responsible, the ones who care the most, the ones who tried, the ones who loved. But because they're so empathic, so sensitive, they internalize the pain of others as their own. Not because they deserve it, but because they never learned how to separate compassion from culpability. Imagine this. A friend opens up about something dark. You listen. You hold space. But later, they spiral. And you wonder, did I say the wrong thing? Did I fail them? You didn't cause their pain. You were just there when they revealed it. But now your brain rewrites the story. Maybe I'm to blame, that's the program. Or maybe someone in your life suffered deeply. Addiction, depression, loss. And you think, if I'd noticed sooner, loved harder, done more, maybe it would have been different. But sometimes people are on paths you can't rewrite. Sometimes pain isn't preventable, but guilt doesn't accept that. It wants to make you the author of a story you never wrote. And then there's survivor's guilt. You walked away from something, an accident, a trauma, a toxic family, and built a new life. But the people you left behind didn't. And part of you feels like you betrayed them, like joy must be paid for, like healing is a crime, so you carry invisible shame for escaping what others couldn't. That guilt isn't proof of wrongdoing, it's proof you care too much to let go. But here's what no one tells you. Guilt is not the same as responsibility. Just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you are guilty. Emotions lie, especially the ones installed in childhood, especially the ones born in crisis. So, how do you uninstall this program? Start by naming it. Say the words, "This is misplaced guilt." Create distance between the feeling and the truth. Then ask, what did I actually control? What was truly mine? What belongs to someone else, to chance, to the chaos of life? Next, reframe your story. You weren't the cause, you were the witness. You didn't fail, you showed up. You didn't betray, you survived. The mind loves to create narratives where you're the villain. Flip that script. Tell a truer version. And finally, give yourself permission to grieve without guilt. You can mourn what happened without believing it was your job to prevent it. You can feel pain without turning it into punishment. Because here's the truth. Carrying guilt you don't deserve doesn't help anyone. It doesn't undo the past. It doesn't heal the wound. It just adds another layer of suffering on your back. You deserve peace, even if the world around you broke. You deserve joy, even if others are still lost. You deserve to move forward, not because you forgot, but because you finally remembered. Not everything was yours to fix. So put down the guilt. Walk out of the courtroom in your mind. The trial is over, and you were never the one on the stand. The completion obsession, and you want answers. You need them. The story must make sense. The ending must be clean. The feelings must be labeled. The questions must be closed. It's not just a preference. It feels like survival. Because the human mind, above all else, craves closure. When faced with ambiguity, it doesn't pause to breathe. It leaps to conclusions. This is the completion obsession. A deep-rooted compulsion to force resolution onto uncertainty, to silence discomfort with certainty, and to wrap the unresolvable in the illusion of understanding. Not because the truth has arrived, but because waiting for it felt unbearable. It starts subtly. Someone ghosts you after weeks of intimacy. The silence eats away at your thoughts. You don't know why they vanished, but not knowing becomes the wound. So your mind rushes to fill the vacuum. Maybe they met someone else. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe they were never real. The story doesn't need to be true. It just needs to close the loop. Because ambiguity feels like pain. So you accept whatever explanation you can find. Not because it's right, but because it's ready. This obsession with completion doesn't stop at relationships. It invades your thoughts, your beliefs, your worldview. You see an unresolved tragedy. A person dies young, a dream collapses, a good deed goes unrewarded. Your brain screams, why? But the universe offers no reply. So you construct meaning. You say, it was fate, a lesson, a test, part of a plan. The truth is, maybe it wasn't any of those things. Maybe it just was. But the mind can't rest in that kind of chaos, so it creates order. Even if the order is artificial, even if it becomes a cage. Think about it. You watch a mystery show. The plot unfolds, questions build, and then, in the final episode, the answers are rushed, unsatisfying, incomplete. You're frustrated, not just because of bad writing, but because your brain spent hours building pathways to closure. And when that closure is denied, it feels like a violation. That frustration is rooted in biology. The mind is wired to complete incomplete information. Unfinished puzzles, unresolved chords, dangling storylines, they spark anxiety. Because to the brain, incompleteness is danger. It means there's something you don't yet understand, and what you don't understand might hurt you. But this same reflex becomes dangerous when applied to real life. You hear two sides of a conflict, one simple, one complex. You pick the simple one. Not because it's more true, but because it's more complete. You see a person in grief and you offer quick comfort. Everything happens for a reason. Not because that's wisdom, but because it silences the ache of ambiguity. You encounter a paradox, free will versus determinism, good versus evil, love versus loss. And instead of sitting with it, you rush to reduce it, to file it away, to close it up. Because open-endedness feels like failure. But here's the paradox. True wisdom often lives in incompletion, in the unclosed question, in the unresolved feeling, in the space between what you know and what you can never fully grasp. Rushing to complete that space doesn't make you wise. It makes you deaf to its deeper lessons. The completion obsession is what turns beliefs into dogma. It's what makes people cling to false memories just because they feel right. It's what turns science into ideology, philosophy into rules, spirituality into control. Not because people are evil, but because they're terrified of unfinished stories. We fear the unknown. So we pretend it's not there. Psychologically, this is rooted in the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember uncompleted tasks more vividly than completed ones. But on a deeper level, this effect becomes existential. The unfinished business of our lives, the unsaid words, the unanswered questions, the unresolved emotions, they haunt us. And in that haunting, we reach for closure like it's oxygen. But sometimes the most honest response is, I don't know. Sometimes the wisest thing to do is wait. We see this everywhere. In religion, people invent intricate afterlife systems, not only to explain death, but to complete it. In relationships, we demand explanations not to grow, but to soothe. In art, we feel disappointed when an ending is ambiguous, even though that ambiguity is often closer to real life. The completion obsession makes us prefer fiction over truth, because fiction ends. Reality often doesn't. It gets more personal. You're grieving, you don't understand why someone had to go. You try to be strong, you say things like, they're in a better place, or it happened for a reason. But inside, you're still aching for a kind of closure that may never arrive. That might not exist. The pain doesn't ask for logic, it asks to be felt. But feeling it fully means accepting that some wounds don't have answers, that not every door gets to close, and that acceptance is its own kind of strength. So, what's the way out of the trap? It starts with awareness. Notice the urgency in you when something is left open. That anxious pull to label, define, explain, resolve. Don't fight it, but don't obey it either. Let the question breathe, let the discomfort linger. Say, this isn't finished, and that's okay. Second, embrace ambiguity as a form of depth. Let paradox be your teacher. Let mystery be part of your worldview. Not everything needs to be solved. Some truths only reveal themselves through time, through living, not through logic. Third, question the stories you've used to close loops, the ones you told yourself to sleep at night, the ones that made you feel safe. Ask, did I accept this because it's true, or because it ended the ache? If the answer is the latter, you may be living inside a false conclusion. And finally, allow yourself to be incomplete. You are not a finished book. You are a living question, a shifting, evolving, fragmentary being. The need to be figured out is the need to be boxed. But boxes don't grow, they contain. And if you want to grow, truly grow, you must leave some pages unwritten, some doors ajar, some wounds visible. The completion obsession tells you that peace comes from answers, but real peace comes from surrendering the need to have them, from sitting with the mess, from loving the gap between knowing and not knowing. Because life isn't a novel, it's a river. And if you demand a perfect ending, you'll miss the current. You'll miss the depth. You'll miss the mystery. And most of all, you'll miss the truth that some of the most important things in your life will never be complete. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes them beautiful. The story-first fallacy. You like to think you're rational, that you collect facts like clean data points, weigh them objectively, and form conclusions based on truth. But the mind doesn't work that way. It never has. Long before logic, long before accuracy, long before evidence, your brain craved something else, a story. You're not a scientist by instinct, you're a storyteller. You take fragments, sensory inputs, moments, memories, glimpses of reality, and weave them into something that feels true, a beginning, middle, and end, a cause and effect, a hero, and a villain. A pattern that fits inside the architecture of meaning. This is the story-first fallacy. You don't find the story after collecting the facts. You build the story first, and then bend the facts to fit it. Even if they don't. Even if they're screaming something else entirely. Because your brain is optimized for coherence, not correctness. It wants the pieces to fit, not to be honest. So, when new information arrives, something that contradicts your narrative or complicates it, you don't absorb it. You reject it. You ignore it. You explain it away. Or worse, you never even see it because your attention filters it out before it reaches conscious awareness. It's not intentional. It's protective. Stories give you identity, stability, a sense of control, and the brain will do whatever it takes to preserve that, especially if the story is emotional. If you believe someone betrayed you, every ambiguous glance becomes evidence. Every silence becomes guilt. Every apology feels calculated. If you believe you're unworthy, compliments bounce off. Achievements feel like luck. Love feels temporary. The story writes the lens, and the lens rewrites the world. You do this with people, with memories, with politics, with history, with yourself. You take a few key facts and you fill in the rest, not with data, but with assumptions, feelings, hunches, emotional logic. And once the story is formed, it becomes sticky. Disconfirming evidence feels uncomfortable. It threatens the coherence of the story, and so the mind treats it like an intruder. You're more likely to question the fact than the narrative. You'll poke holes in the source, the timing, the motive behind the information. You'll delay, reframe, deny, because it's safer to bend the world than to shatter the story that shaped your view of it. This is why two people can witness the same event and walk away with opposite truths. Why entire societies fracture over differing versions of reality. Why people cling to falsehoods even when shown clear, undeniable proof. The facts weren't absorbed because they didn't fit the story. And we don't like broken stories, so we patch them. We seal the cracks, we discard the evidence, we revise our memories, and then we forget we ever changed anything. The story feels seamless again, but it's not truth. It's just more convincing. Even your memories aren't safe. You think you're recalling them, but often you're reconstructing them. Retelling them through the lens of the story you've chosen, and each time you recall them, you revise them, just slightly, so they align better, tighter, cleaner. The story grows sharper, the facts grow blurrier, and here's the trap. The more coherent the story becomes, the more confident you feel in its accuracy. But confidence isn't truth, it's just a feeling, and feelings follow narrative. So what can you do? You can begin by noticing. By asking, what story am I telling myself right now? What facts am I ignoring because they don't fit? What if I'm wrong, not about the detail, but about the entire shape of the story itself? That question is terrifying because it means loosening your grip on something that has defined you, a belief, a worldview, a self-image. But in that discomfort is freedom. Because when you stop defending the story, you begin discovering the truth. When you let go of narrative-first thinking, you start seeing things as they are, not as they fit. You stop forcing coherence and start allowing complexity. Real truth is messy. It doesn't always have a moral. It doesn't always make you the hero. It doesn't always resolve neatly. But it liberates you because it's real. And real is where healing happens. Growth happens. Clarity begins. So, next time you find yourself certain, absolutely certain, about how something is or was or will be, pause. Ask, is this confidence based on evidence or just on the comfort of a story I've told myself too many times? And be willing to change it. Not because you're weak, but because you're awake. Because the truth isn't afraid of being tested. Only the story is. The peak end rule hack. You remember that vacation, not for the 5 days of quiet walks or the hours of gentle waves, but for the time you lost your passport at the airport and for the one perfect sunset on the 4th night. That's what stuck. That's what became the memory. Not the full experience, just the emotional spikes. This is the peak end rule, a powerful mental shortcut your brain uses to summarize experiences. And it doesn't measure the full timeline. It cheats. It pulls 2 moments out of the whole, the most intense part, the peak, and the very last part, the end. Then it stitches them together and calls it the truth. The rest? Forgotten. compressed, erased. So even if most of an event was neutral or even unpleasant, it can still feel like a good memory if it ended on a high note. And the reverse is just as true. A single sharp moment of pain can poison something that was mostly beautiful. Your brain edits the movie, keeps two scenes, and burns the rest. Think of childbirth. Hours, sometimes days of labor. Pain, sweat, fear, but the peak, the moment the baby arrives, and the end, when the baby cries, when you hold them, those two slices override everything else. And years later, that's what's remembered, which is why people do it again. The memory has been rewritten. Now think smaller. A conversation. A date. A dinner. Maybe the evening was warm and funny, but if it ended in a weird silence or an awkward goodbye, that's the part that glues itself to your brain. You say it felt off, even though most of it was fine, even wonderful. Or the opposite. A mediocre party with one unforgettable joke near the end. Suddenly, it's a great night. You'd go again, because the summary your brain keeps isn't a graph, it's a snapshot of extremes. And here's where it gets dangerous. Because this editing process doesn't just affect memory, it shapes decision-making. You choose future experiences based on how past ones felt in hindsight. But your hindsight is flawed. You might avoid public speaking forever because of one peak moment of embarrassment. Even though most of your talk was well received, you might keep chasing a toxic relationship because of one perfect night at the end, despite months of slow damage in between. You remember the peak, you remember the end. You forget the slow erosion, and your life starts getting built on fragments. Not the whole story. The peak end rule is part of a deeper truth. Your memory is not a record, it's a reconstruction. It's not measured by minutes, but by meaning, and meaning is emotionally biased. The peaks are often intense, the ends are often symbolic. Everything else gets filed under filler, and yet, those fillers, that's where the real shaping happens. Your values don't change in a climax, they change in repetition. Your habits don't form at the end, they form in the middle. The average of your days, the boring in-between pieces, are the architecture of your identity, but they rarely make it into the story you tell yourself. So, what do? First, recognize the bias. When you reflect on something, pause and ask, am I remembering the whole, or just the high and the last? That question alone can reveal distortions. Second, try to track the middle. Journal, document, record, the boring stuff, the gentle stuff, the patterns. These are the invisible bricks you're building a life with. Third, hack the rule. Yes, use it. If the brain only remembers peaks and ends, craft them deliberately. End your meetings on a kind word. End your day with something peaceful. Plan experiences so the final note is a good one, because that's the part your future self will remember. You can shape your own nostalgia. And finally, don't trust your memory blindly. Sometimes the great trip wasn't so great. Sometimes the awful event had more nuance. If your whole judgment hangs on one spike or one exit, maybe it's time to revisit the rest of the arc. The peak end rule isn't a flaw, it's an efficiency. Your mind is trying to summarize. But if you mistake that summary for the whole truth, you'll start misunderstanding your own life. So ask yourself, what have I overlooked just because it was steady, quiet, or slow? That may be where the real meaning lives. Not in the fireworks, not in the finale, but in the middle you forgot to keep. The mirror familiarity bias. You look at a photo of yourself, and something feels off. The smile looks strange. The angle seems wrong. You wonder, is that really me? But when you catch your reflection in the mirror, everything looks just fine. Familiar, comfortable, right. That difference between the you that others see and the you that you're used to isn't just a quirk, it's a glitch. A deeply rooted psychological phenomenon known as the mirror familiarity bias. You don't see yourself the way others do. You see the flipped version. Every day, your mirror shows you a reversed image, left and right swapped, familiar details flipped. Over time, your brain falls in love with that reflection. Not because it's more accurate, but because it's more familiar. And that familiarity breeds affection. You trust what you've seen most. So, when you look at an unflipped photo, a camera's version of your face, it clashes with the internal model your brain has quietly built. It feels wrong. It feels alien. Even if it's objectively accurate, it doesn't feel like you. This is the strange truth. You're in a one-sided relationship with your own reflection. It's not just how you look, it's how you believe you should look, the symmetry, the expressions, the way your eyes crinkle or your mouth tilts. All of it has been wired into your self-image through repetition. You've spent thousands of hours looking at the mirror version of yourself, and now your brain defends it like a trusted friend. But that trust comes at a cost. When others see a photo of you, they might love it. To them, it is you. It matches the version they've always known. But to you, it's off. You critique it. You feel detached. You start comparing that photo to the mirror you know. You wonder why your face looks crooked, or why something feels unfamiliar, and you start assigning meaning to it. You assume it's unflattering, when in reality, it's just unmirrored. And this disconnect isn't just aesthetic. It feeds insecurity. It deepens self-doubt. You post a selfie and immediately overanalyze it. You delete photos that others find beautiful because they don't match the image in your mind. You seek approval from others while secretly distrusting their perception. Because it's not the version of you know, it's the version they see. But the truth is, everyone lives with this illusion. Every person you meet feels the same dissonance when they look at themselves through a camera lens. They too are in love with their reflection. They too feel flawed in photos. You're not broken. You're not vain. You're just human. The mirror familiarity bias is a cousin of the mirror exposure effect. The more you see something, the more you like it. It happens with art, with music, with faces. And in your case, it happens with your own identity. You've been conditioned to favor the flipped version of yourself. It's not truth. It's pattern recognition dressed as preference. But the bias doesn't end at appearance. It leaks into self-concept. You begin to build your personality around the version you know. You assume others see you the way you see yourself. But they don't. You interpret their reactions through the mirror of your own expectations. And when those reactions don't align, you feel misunderstood, even though the misunderstanding began in the reflection. So what do? First, recognize that your discomfort with photos isn't a sign of ugliness, it's a sign of unfamiliarity. Your face isn't broken, your self-image is just distorted by the mirror you've trusted for too long. Second, expose yourself to both versions. Look at photos more often. Sit with the discomfort. Rewire the brain's preferences by expanding what it considers familiar. Eventually, the unfamiliar becomes accepted, and the reflection loses its monopoly on identity. And finally, remind yourself that no one sees you perfectly. Everyone sees a version, you included. You are not your mirror. You are not your photos. You are something more fluid, an impression that shifts depending on light, memory, angle, and emotion. Your brain fell in love with a flipped illusion, but that illusion doesn't define you. It's just one angle, one surface. And the people who love you, they've never seen your reflection, only your reality. And they still chose you. The choice justification loop. ChatGPT said, you made the decision. Maybe it was big, like ending a relationship, quitting a job, choosing a city. Or maybe it was small, what to eat, what to wear, what to watch. But as soon as the choice locks in, something subtle happens. Your mind starts rewriting the narrative. You begin noticing all the good things about what you picked, and all the flaws in what you didn't. The scale tips, not because it should, but because it must. This is the choice justification loop. It's not logic. It's a psychological survival mechanism. The brain hates regret. It hates dissonance. It wants a clean, consistent story, one where the decision you made was the right one. So, it edits. It rearranges facts. It cherry-picks memories. It makes you believe that your choice was better than it actually was, and that the road not taken wasn't worth taking anyway. This is how your mind protects your identity from cracking. The choice justification loop begins with discomfort. Whenever you face a decision, especially a permanent or emotionally charged one, you invite uncertainty. And uncertainty creates cognitive dissonance, that aching tension between what you want to believe and what reality shows you. So the brain does what it's always done in moments like these. It rewrites the story to make it make sense. Take a study from the 1950s, still cited today. Participants were asked to rank a series of household items by preference. Then they were told they could take one item home, but only from two they'd ranked closely. After choosing, they were asked to rank the items again. And just like that, the item they chose jumped higher in their rankings, while the one they rejected dropped. Nothing had changed, except the need to feel right. This loop doesn't just shape memories, it shapes identity. You decide to become a doctor. Now, your brain starts filtering the world through that lens. Every success becomes proof you chose well. Every doubt gets dismissed as temporary. Stories about burnout, missed passions, or alternative careers get minimized, because to admit you might have been happier doing something else, that's unbearable. So, the loop spins, and the choice cements. It even shows up in love. You pick a partner, and suddenly the quirks you once tolerated become charming. Their flaws become unique. The people you dated before, clearly wrong for you. But are they really? Or did your brain just rewrite the past to protect your current story? This isn't weakness, it's wiring. Your brain isn't built for endless uncertainty. It wants coherence, finality, a narrative arc. So it manipulates your emotional lens to smooth over contradictions. And while that can bring relief, it can also trap you in illusions, because the loop doesn't just rewrite the past, it blocks the future. Once you've justified a choice, you're less likely to revisit it, even if new information arises. Even if the decision no longer serves you, you double down. You say, well, I already invested so much, or I made my bed. This is sunk cost fallacy, fused with justification bias. It's why people stay in careers they hate, relationships that hurt, places they've outgrown. Not because they're stuck, but because they need the story to be true. And the more irreversible the choice, the stronger the loop. That's why we justify the things we can't undo more fiercely than the ones we can. If you bought a shirt and can still return it, your brain stays flexible. But buy a house or end a friendship, the loop activates. Now the stakes are high. The regret would be enormous. So the brain suppresses regret by enhancing the choice. Social media intensifies this. You post your vacation, your wedding, your new job, and now you're performing your choice for others. This performance demands consistency. If you express doubt or dissatisfaction, it threatens the image. So you polish the story even more. You become not just a chooser, but an ambassador of your choice. The loop tightens, but there's a cost. When the loop becomes too strong, you stop telling yourself the truth. You ignore signs that your choice wasn't ideal. You miss out on better paths because you're too invested in the one you picked. You turn temporary decisions into permanent identities. And when things go wrong, you feel trapped, not just by circumstance, but by the weight of your own narrative. So, how do you break free? You start by noticing. Awareness is the first crack in the loop. When you feel yourself dismissing the alternative, pause. Ask, is this real? Or is this relief masquerading as truth? Am I choosing clarity or comfort? Then, allow duality. You can honor your choice and still grieve what you gave up. You can be proud of your path and still admit it's imperfect. Regret doesn't mean you failed. It means you're honest enough to see the full picture. Next, revisit your story. Not to rewrite it, but to open it. Tell yourself, this was the best decision at the time with what I knew. That allows room to grow without shame. It removes the need to inflate or destroy the past. It just lets it be. And finally, practice psychological flexibility. Life is long. Choices are many. You don't owe your past self blind loyalty. You owe your present self clarity and your future self freedom. The mind will always seek to reduce discomfort. That's what it does. But you don't have to obey every edit it makes. You can learn to sit with the tension, to say, this is the path I chose, and it's okay if it's not perfect. Because the truth is, every choice opens one door and closes another. That's the nature of living. And the goal isn't to never feel regret. The goal is to move forward anyway, without lying to yourself to make it easier. Let your choices be real. Let your doubt be human. And let the story keep evolving, even if it means revising the chapters you once believed were finished. The false consensus effect. You look at the world and see your own reflection. Not in mirrors, but in minds. You assume most people share your beliefs, your sense of right and wrong, your view of what's obvious, reasonable, fair. You think your perspective is common sense, that your values are the baseline, that anyone who thinks differently must be confused, misinformed, or lying. But here's the trap. It's not that everyone agrees with you, it's that your brain wants to believe they do. This is the false consensus effect, a psychological distortion that convinces you the way you think is the way most people think, and that consensus is proof of truth. It's not arrogance, it's survival. From the beginning of your life, your mind has used one lens to understand everything, your own. Your emotions, your experiences, your biases, these form the ground beneath your perception. But you forget that it's not universal ground, it's personalized. You are standing on your own psychological island, and yet you speak as though you're walking on shared land. That illusion, the belief that most people would agree, isn't a harmless assumption. It's a distortion that warps how you judge others, how you process disagreement, and how you navigate conflict. Imagine you take a moral stance on a controversial topic, something you've thought about deeply. You know your reasons. They feel strong, stable, even obvious. Now, imagine someone disagrees. Your brain doesn't first wonder, what might they know that I don't? Instead, it instinctively assumes they're the outlier. They must be part of a smaller, less reasonable group. Why? Because if you think something, then surely the average person must too. You project your view onto the population, inflating the size of your tribe, then call it truth. This happens in politics. You support a candidate, believe in a policy, reject a particular ideology. You read posts that agree with you. You talk to friends who reinforce your views. You scroll through content that aligns with your beliefs. Slowly, your world feels full of agreement. But it's not the world, it's your bubble, your filter, your echo chamber. And the more you stay inside it, the more convinced you become that your thoughts are the default setting for reality. Then something strange happens. You're blindsided. An election result you didn't expect. A cultural shift you didn't see coming. A friend reveals a belief that shocks you, and suddenly the illusion cracks. You thought your worldview was common sense, but what was common to you was never consensus. It was just projection. The false consensus effect isn't just about politics. It shapes every interaction you have. You assume your humor is universal, that your taste is shared, that your standards for loyalty, success, or love are naturally understood. But when people disappoint you, it often isn't because they're wrong. It's because they were never operating from your map to begin with. You just didn't realize they had one of their own. This illusion becomes most dangerous in judgment. You see someone make a decision you disagree with, and you say, I don't understand how anyone could think that way. But that's the problem. You don't understand, and instead of seeking understanding, you use your confusion as evidence of their failure. You think, they must be irrational, extreme, selfish, evil. But maybe they're just different. Maybe their experiences led them down a different road. Maybe they're not broken. Maybe your frame is just not the only one that exists. And yet, this effect keeps operating quietly. The more certain you are of your view, the more you overestimate how many people share it. It's a protective mechanism. If everyone agrees with you, you feel less alone, less vulnerable, more validated. Consensus feels like confirmation, like safety, like being part of something larger than yourself. But it's a trick. Agreement isn't truth. Popularity isn't proof, and being echoed doesn't make you right. Psychologically, this bias shows up in studies again and again. People consistently overestimate how many others share their opinions, even when those opinions are objectively rare. They assume their behavior is more typical than it is. They believe their values are more widespread. And when faced with disagreement, they experience cognitive dissonance, not because they've been challenged, but because their illusion of consensus has been broken. But there's another layer to this glitch. When you believe most people think like you feel emboldened. You speak louder, judge faster, polarize quicker. And when others disagree, you see them not as individuals, but as threats. You begin to think they're the minority trying to impose something unnatural. But maybe it's not them. Maybe it's you. Maybe your belief isn't shared as widely as you think. Maybe your truth is one color in a spectrum, not the entire canvas. The false consensus effect becomes especially dangerous in power. Leaders who believe their views are universally shared make reckless decisions. Groups that assume their morality is standard push others into silence. Movements that ignore dissent build ideologies out of illusion and collapse when reality pushes back. So, how do we escape this trap? First, humility. A quiet kind. Not performative, not self-doubt, but the humility to say, my mind is not a mirror of the world. It's a lens. A shaped, curved, colored lens. And others are looking through different ones. Second, curiosity. Not, why do they think that, with disdain, but what happened in their life that made that belief feel right to them? Because behind every disagreement is a life you haven't lived. Third, friction. Welcome it. Let your ideas be challenged. Surround yourself with difference. Read the thing that annoys you. Listen to the person you're tempted to mute, not because they're right, but because your illusion needs to be broken. And finally, awareness. When you hear yourself say, everyone thinks this, pause. Ask, do they? Or is that just what I see, what I read, what I prefer to believe? Because comfort can be a kind of blindness, and illusions, when left unexamined, become cages. The false consensus effect is seductive. It makes you feel seen, heard, right. But it also makes you rigid, defensive, and isolated from truth, because truth doesn't care how many people believe it. Truth exists even when no one claps for it, even when it contradicts what you hoped was obvious. So, next time you think, most people would agree with me, remember, you're not looking at the world. You're looking into a mirror, and the reflection staring back might not be real. The threat overfocus reflex. You walk through your day and notice what went wrong, the message that didn't come, the look that felt cold, the silence that stung. You remember the mistake, not the compliment. The failure, not the progress. The danger, not the safety. This isn't because you're ungrateful. It's not because you're negative. It's because your brain was built to survive, not to be happy. This is the threat overfocus reflex. It's the ancient wiring that pulls your attention toward anything that might hurt you. Not because it's likely, but because it could be fatal. Evolution doesn't care if you're joyful. It cares if you make it to tomorrow. And to ensure that, your nervous system developed a simple strategy. Notice what might kill you. Ignore what won't. So joy becomes background noise. Safety becomes invisible. You don't wake up thinking, nothing attacked me in the night. You don't savor the absence of pain, the presence of air, the steady beat of your own heart. You only notice the moment something feels off. A missed call, a strange tone, an unreadable expression. Your brain zooms in. It replays the scene. It analyzes, warns, repeats. And even when the danger is gone, the echo lingers. This reflex kept your ancestors alive. Those who noticed the rustle in the grass, the flash of anger in a rival's eye, the changing pattern of the wind. Those were the ones who lived. The ones who stopped to enjoy the sunset were the ones who didn't see the predator coming. But in a modern world, this reflex becomes a distortion, because now the threats are rarely life or death. But your body still treats them that way. A sharp email feels like attack. A disagreement feels like exile. A delay feels like danger. Your system floods with adrenaline, your mind loops, your muscles tense, your focus narrows, and in that moment, everything else disappears. You don't see the good. You don't feel the connection. You don't register the hundreds of ways you're safe, because your brain is screaming something might be wrong, and it wants your full attention. This is why you can receive 10 compliments and fixate on the one criticism. Why one awkward moment can hijack an entire evening. Why you can feel loved and supported and still spiral over a minor rejection. Your mind wasn't designed to be fair. It was designed to be alert. So, even in a room full of comfort, your eyes search for the shadow. And when they find it, your story changes. The light becomes irrelevant. The warmth disappears. The threat becomes everything. And you believe it because it feels urgent. And urgency tricks the mind into thinking something is true. But the reflex isn't truth. It's just a bias, a lens, a survival pattern that was never meant to shape your emotional life. But it does, constantly. It keeps you scanning, doubting, protecting, guarding, and it keeps you from peace. Because peace is quiet, and quiet doesn't trigger alarms, so your brain dismisses it. You reach safety. And instead of relaxing, you search for the next threat, the next conflict, the next mistake to prevent. You never arrive. You just brace. And that bracing becomes your baseline. So, how do you break it? Not by force, not by trying to shut off the instinct, but by noticing it, by naming it, by realizing that your attention is not truth. It's triage. It's based on fear, not fact. And once you name it, you can shift it. You can train your awareness to hold both, the threat and the blessing, the tension and the trust, the pain and the presence. You can ask, what is working right now? What isn't wrong? What is quietly beautiful beneath the noise? And over time, your nervous system learns a new pattern. It stops scanning for danger as default. It starts recognizing safety not as absence, but as presence, as something worth noticing, worth savoring, the warmth in your chest when someone really sees you, the moment your breath softens, the silence that isn't empty, but whole. This is not toxic positivity. It's not pretending everything's fine. It's reclaiming balance. It's teaching your brain that not everything needs to be a fire, because the threat is not always real. But the blessing is, if you can see it. And seeing it is a choice, not once, but over and over, until presence becomes your reflex, and peace, your new default. The category distortion bias. You meet someone new. Within seconds, your mind starts labeling introvert, extrovert, artist, academic, threat, ally, useful, irrelevant. You don't realize you're doing it, but the moment they speak, the moment they dress, the moment they move, you're already filing them into a category that already exists in your mind. Not to understand them, to manage them. That's the category distortion bias. Your brain doesn't process the world as it is. It processes the world as you expect it to be. And the way it does that is by dragging everything new into the gravity wells of the familiar. You take new information, ideas, people, emotions, and instead of letting it stand on its own terms, you stuff it into the closest box you've seen before. It's faster. It feels safer. It makes the world make sense. But it's a lie of compression, and the cost is clarity. A stranger who challenges your worldview becomes difficult. A behavior you don't understand gets labeled wrong. A belief system you've never examined gets sorted under dangerous. Not because it is, but because your mental filing cabinet only had so many drawers open. And when you ran out of space, you started cramming. Imagine trying to store a delicate sculpture inside a suitcase full of bricks. That's what your mind does with nuanced reality. It forces fit. It shaves edges. It throws away detail, all to keep the illusion that everything fits into something you already know. This bias starts young. A child sees a four-legged animal and learns, that's a dog. So the next time they see a cat, they shout, dog. The brain is making a guess. It's collapsing the unknown into the known. And while that's developmentally natural, it doesn't stop with childhood. You do it now, every day. You read a news story and decide, left or right, good or bad. You meet someone from a group you have one experience with and decide, same as the last. You hear a new idea, and instead of holding it in open uncertainty, you rush to classify it. Science, pseudoscience, smart, nonsense, and in that rush, the idea gets reduced. The person gets blurred. The truth gets simplified until it's no longer true. This is why people misunderstand art, or misread intentions, or misjudge intelligence. They're not looking at the thing. They're looking at the category they forced it into, and mistaking that box for reality. The most dangerous part? It doesn't feel like bias. It feels like understanding. You feel smart, efficient, certain. But what you're actually feeling is the emotional relief of having named something, even if you named it wrong. And once you've labeled something, once you've dropped it into a category, your mind becomes resistant to any information that challenges that label. Confirmation bias kicks in. Dissonance filters snap shut. And now, even when the box doesn't fit anymore, you keep shoving the thing deeper into it, because changing categories is exhausting. Admitting mislabeling is threatening. And you've already built too much of your map around that one false filing. Category distortion doesn't just distort the world, it distorts you. It turns your belief system into a rigid architecture, your opinions into filters, your curiosity into reflexive judgment. You stop seeing newness, you only see patterns, and slowly the richness of the world flattens into cliches. Have you ever caught yourself saying, "Oh, I know the type"? That's the voice of the distortion. Or maybe you reject a genre of music because you know what it's like. You avoid an academic field because those people are all the same. You dismiss an argument because it sounds like one you've heard before. Not because it is the same, but because your brain ran a lazy match and called it a day. So, what can you do? First, notice when your brain wants to label. The moment you feel the comfort of naming, Pause. Ask, what if this doesn't belong in any category I've used before? What if this is something entirely new? Second, let things remain uncategorized. Resist the urge to classify too soon. Let people surprise you. Let ideas remain unfinished. Complexity is not your enemy. It's your doorway to deeper vision. Third, examine your mental drawers. What categories do you use most often? Are they based on truth or trauma? Learning or laziness? Who taught them to you? And what are they hiding? Because what you call understanding might just be overfitting. The world is full of things that don't belong in any box you've made. People that don't fit your binaries, emotions that can't be filed as good or bad, realities that blur your moral shortcuts. And until you can hold something without naming it, you'll never really see it. The category distortion bias isn't just a mistake. It's a way of building a mental prison, decorated with labels, organized with confidence, and blind to everything it excluded. So, the next time you catch yourself thinking, I know what this is, ask yourself, do I really? Or did I just put it in a box because I was afraid to let it stay free? Because maybe the truth isn't in the box. Maybe it's what you kept out. The effort, misreading illusion. You've been told since childhood that hard work is everything. That if you try harder, stay longer, push deeper, you'll rise. That effort alone writes the story of success. And so, when someone makes it big or outshines the rest, your first thought is often, they must have worked harder. And when you fail, stumble, or fall behind, you wonder, was I just not trying enough? But this belief, so noble, so deeply ingrained, is also deeply misleading. This is the effort misreading illusion, the idea that more effort equals better outcomes, that success is earned through sweat alone, that failure must mean you didn't want it badly enough. It feels moral, it feels fair, but it's not always true. You've seen it happen. Two people work equally hard, give everything they have. One gets noticed, the other doesn't. One gets lucky, lands in the right place, meets the right person, speaks at the right time. The other grinds in silence, unnoticed, unrewarded. They both bled, but only one gets the medal. Yet the world doesn't see the full picture, it sees the winner. And it assumes they must have tried harder, they must have wanted it more. That's the illusion. We treat visible success as proof of invisible effort, ignoring the quiet machinery of luck, timing, privilege, and randomness. We overvalue effort when it succeeds, and undervalue it when it doesn't. The truth is, effort matters. But it doesn't work alone. Behind every triumph is a stack of invisible forces. The family you were born into, the era you grew up in, the mentors you met, the risks you could afford to take, the biases you never had to face. And chance, pure, unearned chance, plays a role too. The job offer that landed by coincidence, the one meeting that shifted everything, the illness you didn't get, the burden you didn't carry. These factors don't erase your work, but they bend the road. And yet, your brain resists this truth. It wants neat stories. Effort feels like a clean explanation. They worked harder, they deserved more. But that logic cuts both ways, because if effort equals success, then failure must mean you didn't try hard enough. And that's cruel. Imagine someone who gave everything, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and still fell short. The illusion whispers, you didn't want it enough. You didn't hustle hard enough. You should have sacrificed more. But maybe they didn't fail. Maybe they just weren't noticed. Or maybe the system was never built for them to win. This mindset becomes toxic. It breeds burnout. People push themselves past exhaustion, not because it's healthy, but because they believe it's the only way. That if they just give more hours, more pain, they'll finally break through. But sometimes the door isn't locked because you're weak. Sometimes the hinges are welded shut, or the room is rigged, or the spotlight never swings your way. You've been conditioned to believe effort is everything because it flatters your sense of control. It tells you the world is fair. But fairness is a fragile illusion. Life is not a meritocracy. It's a roulette wheel with 1,000 weighted edges. This doesn't mean effort is pointless. It's not. Your work matters. Your persistence matters. But effort is not the whole equation. It's just one variable among many. When you realize this, a strange thing happens. You become kinder. to yourself, to others. You stop judging people by their outcomes alone. You begin to ask, what don't I see? What helped them or held them back? You stop glorifying the winner and start honoring the struggler. So the next time you feel like you failed, don't rush to blame your effort. Maybe you gave more than enough. Maybe what you lacked wasn't drive, but visibility, timing, or access. And when you look at someone else's rise, don't assume their work was greater. Just remember it was also seen. The illusion of effort as proof is seductive, but the truth is quieter, heavier, more compassionate. Work hard, yes, but don't mistake effort for destiny. Don't tie your worth to the outcome alone, because the world doesn't always reward effort. But that doesn't mean you didn't give everything you had. The symbolic reward error. You wanted meaning, fulfillment, recognition, maybe just a sense of peace. And somewhere in that search, you began chasing symbols instead. Numbers, trophies, letters after your name. You told yourself they'd lead to the feeling. That once you had the title, the award, the crowd, you'd finally feel enough. But when you got them, the feeling didn't last. The goalposts moved, the high faded. You reached the summit and found it hollow. This is the symbolic reward error. It's the invisible substitution your brain makes when the true reward feels abstract. You crave purpose, so you chase performance. You want love, so you seek likes. You need connection, so you gather followers. You long for growth, so you obsess over grades. You don't even realize the swap has happened, because the symbol looks like the real thing. It resembles value, it imitates meaning. But it is not meaning, and it's not your fault. From a young age, you're trained to respond to symbols, stars on homework, report cards, applause, a raised thumb, a red heart. These are easy to measure, easy to compare, and because they're visible, they feel more real than the silent, slow internal shifts that actually change you. The world teaches you to measure progress by what others can see, but some of the most important growth leaves no evidence. You studied hard, not for the joy of learning, but for the grade. You worked long hours, not for mastery, but for the promotion. You posted your art, not for the love of expression, but for the algorithm. And the moment the symbol doesn't come, when the likes don't arrive, the award isn't given, the crowd stays silent, you feel empty. Not because you failed, but because you were chasing the wrong thing. This is how the symbolic reward error traps you. You run faster, push harder, sacrifice more, not to get closer to your purpose, but to achieve the next symbol. And every time you get it, your brain rewards you with a brief hit of dopamine, a surge of triumph. But it's fleeting. And now you need more. So the cycle repeats. More followers, more money, more praise, but no peace. Because the inner need you started with is still unmet, and symbols are addictive. They're clean, quantifiable, shareable. They let you avoid the messy work of asking what you actually want. They protect you from discomfort, from facing the truth that even with all your achievements, you might still feel alone, unseen, or unfulfilled. That truth is hard. So the brain grabs the shortcut, the illusion, and society reinforces it at every turn. Platforms reward visibility, not depth. Schools reward test scores, not curiosity. Workplaces reward productivity, not humanity. Even love gets reduced to optics. Are you a power couple? Do you look happy? Does it post well? The real thing, the private, vulnerable, spiritual thing, gets lost. But here's the paradox. Chasing symbols often blocks the very thing they're supposed to represent. When you chase status, you lose authenticity. When you chase perfection, you lose joy. When you chase followers, you forget to connect. The symbol becomes the prison, and it can be hard to let go. Because without the symbol, how do you prove your worth? How do you show your progress? How do you know you're enough? That's the hardest part of the symbolic reward error. It demands you build an internal compass, one that doesn't rely on applause, one that doesn't collapse without validation, one that can walk away from the spotlight and still feel real. So, how do you break the loop? Start by asking yourself, what was I chasing before the symbol entered? What feeling was I hungry for? Was it security? Belonging? Freedom? Joy? Those are the real rewards, the ones you can't screenshot, the ones you have to build from the inside out. Then, take inventory. Which of your goals are real and which are just shiny? Are you writing to be heard or to be famous? Are you working to grow or to win? Are you posting because you care or because you need the hit? Be brutally honest. That honesty might hurt, but it's the beginning of alignment. Next, reclaim small private joy. Create things no one sees. Learn things no one grades. Do work that doesn't scale. Moments that aren't measured. Let them be enough. That's where real power begins. Not in performance, but in presence. And finally, forgive yourself. You fell for the illusion because it was everywhere. Because it promised safety. Because it looked like success. You didn't fail. You just woke up. And now, you get to choose differently. Because here's the truth. Symbols are not evil. They can be beautiful when they align with your truth. But they are dangerous when they replace it. You are not your title, not your followers, not your metrics. You are what remains when those things are silent. The symbolic reward. Error doesn't just rob you of peace, it robs the world of your real self. But it doesn't have to. You can step out of the chase. You can return to the feeling. You can choose meaning over metrics, depth over display, substance over symbol. And when you do, something strange happens. The rewards come anyway. Not because you chased them, but because you didn't need them. The inner voice impersonator. You hear it before you speak, before you move, before you even act. A voice inside your mind that sounds like instinct, like inner wisdom, like truth. It says, don't do that. Don't trust them. Don't try. You'll fail. You'll fall. You'll regret it. And because it's internal, because it arrives from within, you believe it must be you. You call it intuition, a gut feeling, a sixth sense. But what if it's not? What if that voice isn't your wisdom at all? What if it's fear, dressed in your tone, wearing your thoughts like a mask? This is the inner voice impersonator, a psychological illusion that hijacks your internal monologue, turning old anxiety into fake prophecy, and making you mistake caution for truth. You don't question it because it feels familiar. That's the trap. The voice doesn't yell, it whispers. It mimics your logic. It copies your cadence. It doesn't feel foreign. It feels like you. But it's not your intuition. It's your history, your wounds, your trauma, your pattern of overthinking, refined over years of repetition. Like a bad actor who's rehearsed the role so well, you forget it's not real. Picture this. You're about to take a risk. Start a business. Share your art. Say, I love you first. You pause. A voice rises. What if this ruins everything? What if they laugh? What if this ends in disaster? You freeze. You step back. And then you justify it. It was my gut talking, you say. I just knew it wasn't right. But was it your gut? Or was it fear impersonating your intuition so well that you surrendered before you even began? Let's draw the line. Intuition is quiet, subtle. It doesn't panic. It feels like a calm, grounded knowing. Something steady, even when it's hard. Fear, on the other hand, is loud, urgent, emotional. It floods you with imagery and memory, with exaggerated futures and distorted pasts. But when that fear is rehearsed often enough, it becomes automatic. It becomes internalized. And then, tragically, it becomes trusted. You start hearing it in all your decisions. Don't speak up. They'll reject you. Don't leave this job. You won't find another. Don't be vulnerable. It's not safe. These statements sound protective. They seem like guidance. But they are just echoes of a past that hasn't been healed. Echoes that mistake survival strategies for insight. The inner voice impersonator evolves with you. It learns what scares you most and plays that note every time you're about to grow. It sounds like intuition, but it's using the oldest, most fearful part of your brain, the amygdala. That part isn't wise, it's reactive. It scans for danger, not truth. And it doesn't care if the danger is real or imagined, it just sounds the alarm. And once it's activated, your whole system reacts. Your body tightens, your thoughts spiral, your breath shortens. And yet, because it all happens inside you, you assume it must be real. If I feel this strongly, it must mean something. But intensity isn't evidence. Anxiety can shout louder than intuition ever will. This is why people stay in relationships long after love has died. Because fear tells them, you'll never find someone else. Why artists never share their work. Because fear whispers, you'll be exposed and judged. Why people silence their own truth. Because the impersonator says, it's not safe to be known. But here's the terrifying part. The more often you listen to that voice, the more you confuse it with who you are. You say things like, that's just how I am. I'm cautious. I'm realistic. I just know things don't work out for me. But that's not who you are. That's a script written by fear and performed by habit. It's not your truth. It's your conditioning. So, how do you tell the difference? Start here. Pause. Don't obey the first voice that rises. Ask, is this fear or is this wisdom? Notice how your body feels. Fear is tight. Intuition is still. Fear rushes. Intuition waits. Fear says run. Intuition says choose. If the voice is panicking, it's probably not your guide. Second, examine the evidence. What past experience is this voice drawing from? Is it reminding you of something real? Or is it recycling old pain? Fear often wears the face of someone who hurt you, of a moment that broke you. And it says, don't repeat that. But not everything that looks similar is similar. Not every risk is a threat. Not every ache is a warning. Third, ask this painful question. What might this voice be trying to protect? Often, it's shielding something tender, your worth, your belonging, your identity. And ironically, by protecting it, the voice also cages it. You don't become safe. You become stuck. And last, let your intuition speak. But give it time. Real intuition doesn't demand instant obedience. It rises slowly, like warmth in the chest, or clarity behind the eyes. It often appears after silence, not inside noise. You'll know it because it won't need to argue. It simply is. The inner voice impersonator is not your enemy. It once tried to keep you safe. But if you never challenge it, it becomes your prison warden, telling you the world is dangerous, that you're not ready, that you should stay small. But you're not small. And you're not broken. You've just been listening to the wrong voice for too long. The goal isn't to silence your inner world, but to discern it, to sort through the noise and ask, who's actually speaking? Because not every voice in your head deserves your trust. Not every feeling is a prophecy. Not every warning is wisdom. And the next time fear tries to dress itself in intuition, look it in the eye and say, I hear you. But you don't get to decide anymore. Because the real voice, the one buried underneath all that noise, is still waiting, still patient, still wise, and still yours.